ALLATRA Global Research Center presents.
We are seeing people being diagnosed earlier compared to 50 years ago. We are seeing people being diagnosed with more aggressive disease of various kinds. And we are seeing people having worse outcome compared to what they used to. And this is despite of all the advancement we have been able to make in the medical science in general. Do we expect the rise in neurodegenerative diseases, disabilities, and so forth? I think we are already seeing that rise.
The rise in cancer rates worldwide is absolutely frightening. I think it's very legitimate to call it an epidemic. There's an increased rate of cancer worldwide in children and also in people much younger than I used to see. So what's going on now is that we're having a rise in people getting cancer, children, young adults, and it's probably not due to smoking or alcohol or anything. There seems to be something else, something in the environment that is causing this cancer at an alarming rate, and it's getting worse. So a very serious problem.
Diseases are emerging early in life. Today's generation is getting sick at ages when their parents were still healthy. And what's worse is that they're often battling not just one, but multiple chronic diseases simultaneously. How can this be happening despite all the advances in modern medicine? What if behind this rapid global decline in human health, there lies a hidden factor, one that we've overlooked all along?
Nanoplastics, a threat to life.
We're talking about microplastics, tiny particles that can't be seen with the naked eye. They're much thinner than a human hair, extremely fine.
From the molecular level to the scale of entire ecosystems, understanding microplastics is crucial for protecting the biosphere and public health.
I was also surprised that it took so long, to people to recognize that's a problem, because this plastic production increased super high in the 1950s, and we have now, I guess, something between 400 and 500 million tons of plastic production every year, and this keeps accumulating, and in all our ecosystems. So it's not only affecting the human life, but the whole ecosystem. So it's every individual, every plant, even bacteria. They take them up. So that's something which we have to take into account.
The fact that it now pervades from our deepest ocean to our highest mountain, that it's present in more or less every living sample that scientists have looked at, and in some populations in considerable proportions, and that it's now pervading, our food, drink, and the air we breathe, to me, is quite concerning.
The science has clearly, without a doubt, shown that these chemicals, these particles are very harmful for us in various ways, not just one organ system, but all organ systems are affected.
Plastic symbolizes progress, a triumph of human ingenuity, a material that is light, strong, and built to last forever. Yet, as humanity, we miss something crucial. We fail to notice how the very material created to improve our lives began instead to endanger them. Unfortunately, people often underestimate the true threat posed by plastics. Many think of it merely as an environmental problem. Bottles scattered on beaches, debris floating across the sea. And yes, these do pollute our planet. But large plastic pieces alone cannot destroy the entire biosphere, including humanity, unlike the microscopic particles they eventually become. This plastic bottle, in this form, it poses no immediate danger. But everything changes once this solid object disintegrates into masses of microscopic fragments. If this half-liter bottle were broken down into plastic particles just 1 micrometer in size, it would create roughly 10 trillion of them. And if all those particles were to penetrate the cells of a human body at once, this single bottle, in the form of nanoparticles, would destroy a person within minutes. Micro and nanoplastics are a threat to life itself. And by life, we mean not only human existence, but the very survival of the entire biosphere. Scientists are sounding the alarm that even today, exposure to these particles is leading to deterioration of health, as well as physical and cognitive decline across humankind. A growing body of research links micro and nanoplastics to the development of diseases, genetic mutations, and the rise of antibiotic resistance. Some researchers even associate tiny plastics with climate anomalies, natural disasters, an increase in seismic activity as trillions of microscopic particles interact with the environment. Over time, they could create uninhabitable zones across our planet. And all of this begins with a simple chain reaction. When plastic, like this very plastic bottle, breaks down into micro and nanoplastics. This documentary is a result of a large-scale investigation. We have examined hundreds of scientific studies and thousands of facts to answer key questions, like why are plastics so particularly dangerous? How can plastic particles threaten the very foundation of life? And what chances remain for humanity to change its course? Today, only a few hundred, perhaps a few thousand people truly understand the magnitude of this threat. A number far too small for a world of 8 billion. But by watching this documentary, you will become one of the few who understand what's really happening. This is a story of why researchers studying nanoplastics call them the number one killer, and how they're already reshaping our future.
Plastic interferes with the universal language of life. We are living in an era when life on Earth is disappearing faster than ever since the age of the dinosaurs. Currently, the extinction rate of species is 1,000 times higher than the natural extinction rates, making our time one of the most devastating periods in all of history in terms of biodiversity loss. The sixth mass extinction is already underway. The modern world is plunging into a biological collapse, like the ones in the past that wiped out up to 90% of all living creatures on the planet. While past global catastrophes were driven by volcanic eruptions or meteor impacts, today a new factor has joined these forces of nature, an invisible enemy created by humans, capable of destroying all life. Plastics are everywhere. Since the mid-20th century, humanity has produced more than 9 billion tons of plastic, a material that was meant to make life easier, but has instead become a deadly trap for nature and for humanity. It is well established that most plastic is never recycled. Professor Antonio Ragusa, an Italian obstetrician gynecologist and researcher who first identified microplastic in the human placenta, explains how it continues its journey through the biosphere.
Of the millions and millions of tons of plastic we produce, less than 10% gets recycled. More than 90% is dumped into the environment. And when plastic gets dumped into the environment, it slowly breaks down into smaller and smaller particles, eventually becoming very small, microplastics, or even tiny nanoplastics. These particles travel down rivers, reach the seas, spread throughout the oceans, and enter the fish we later eat, so they end up back inside us.
The problem of microplastics has long been observed in ecosystems across the globe. Professor Sedat Gündoğdu of Çukurova University in Turkey, founder of a research group on microplastics and expert in marine biology and Mediterranean microplastic contamination, speaks about this growing concern.
I'm working on fish biology mostly. I was working on fish biology since 2016. During my PhD study, I recognized that all the sampling location that we work for biodiversity fully polluted with plastics, not only microplastics, because first we realized that the main problem is plastic itself.
Today, we are accustomed to hearing the word microplastic. But there was a time when this term simply didn't exist. Professor Richard Thompson is a marine biologist at the University of Plymouth, director of the Marine Institute, officer of the Order of the British Empire, and fellow of the Royal Society. In his work, he was the first to describe microscopic plastic particles in the marine environment, laying the foundation for an entirely new field of research.
When I started to teach, I set the challenge to some of my students. They went out onto the shoreline, they collected samples of sand, and we started to look at them under the microscope. And from the very first samples, we could see pieces that did not look like sand grains, brightly colored pieces, red and blue. And it was then almost a kind of forensic journey to confirm their identity. And we confirmed that they were indeed plastics. We showed that they were present around the UK in a range of different habitats, in sediments and in the water column. And interestingly, in that first paper in 2004, my first paper on the topic, we used the term microplastics. And the term hadn't been used in this context for truly microscopic pieces before. There had been, and we referenced them in our paper, some studies of small pieces of plastic before, but we went smaller than anybody else. We showed this bioavailability. We showed the temporal trend of increasing over time.
The ocean is the main reservoir of plastic accumulation. It already contains more than 200 million tons of plastic waste, and this amount continues to grow every day. It is important to understand that plastic does not disappear. Under the influence of sunlight, waves, salinity, and mechanical friction, it breaks down into microplastics and nanoplastics. Microplastics are plastic particles smaller than 5 millimeters in size, while nanoplastics are smaller than 1 micrometer, about 1,000 times thinner than a human hair. There are about 350 trillion microplastic particles in the surface layer of the ocean alone. Yet the real number is far greater. Scientists estimate that roughly 90% of nanoplastic particles are too small to be detected by current analytical instruments. As water evaporates from the surface of oceans and other bodies of water, microplastic particles rise into the atmosphere together with the water vapor. Dr. Dusan Materic, an environmental analyst at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, Germany, leads a research group dedicated to the study of nanoplastics. Dr. Materic investigates atmospheric nanoplastics at the Sonnenblick Observatory in Austria, the oldest high-altitude research station in Europe.
And for those nanoplastics that fragments from big fibers, because of UV weathering, because of just mechanical forces, those shredding nanoplastics are much more potent to stay in the air for a long period, and that means picked up and brought even here at 3,106 meters above sea level. So what we discovered is that we have nanoplastics across all the stations, and we have nanoplastics even in the deepest ocean environment, and our deepest point is below 5,000 meters.
Micro and nanoparticles in the atmosphere can travel thousands of kilometers, crossing from one continent to another. This is noted by Dr. Elke Ludewig from Austria, who heads the Sonnenblick Observatory and the European Center for Cloud Ambient Intercomparison, where the transport of these particles and the effects of this process are recorded.
We know from different cases that we have really long transports of particles from, for example, Japan up to here, or Canada, for example. There are two examples I can tell you. The one is the accident in Fukushima. It took about 11 days until particles, aerosol particles with a higher radiation, received the Sonnenblick Observatory. Another example was in 2025, on the 9th of June, there was a kind of transport, an air mass from Canada received the station here. We could see it in the sky. Of course, we could see it in our data that we had higher aerosol concentration, but the really impressive moment was, and that's why it's also important to have stuff up here, we could really smell the burn in the air. And this lasts for the whole day. So there you can see how intense effects somewhere on the globe, especially on the North Hemisphere, can be, and it's still transported hundreds of kilometers around the North Hemisphere, and we can measure it here and show what it is.
Atmospheric micro and nanoplastics then return to Earth with precipitation, falling with rain or snow and settling in forests, on farmland, and across grasslands, where they seep into the soil and penetrate plants. This is happening all over the planet, in both the northern and southern hemispheres. Liliana Cáceres Sanchez, MSc in Science, Technology and Health, a biologist specializing in ecotoxicology and environmental protection, and a researcher at the Center for Research in Exact Sciences and Engineering at the Bolivian Catholic University San Pablo, notes that microplastics are present in natural environments, in living organisms, and in food products.
In recent years, we've conducted analyses of soil, air, and both surface and groundwater in Cochabamba. We have also examined lakes and lagoons, and in all of these samples, we have found microplastics. The fact that we found microplastics even in areas with no human presence suggests that microplastic particles are actively moving through the environment. In addition, we identified their presence in food and in living organisms. We detected microplastics in milk and other pasteurized products such as yogurt. They were also found in wild animals, for example, in the Titicaca water frog and in fish from a lake near Cochabamba called Angostura. These findings confirm that microplastics have already become part of our food chain and ecological chain.
Due to microplastic pollution, 1 in 10 grains of the world's 3 main food crops, rice, wheat, and corn, may die before harvest. In addition, researchers from the University of Catania have found high concentrations of microplastic particles in apples, pears, carrots, potatoes, lettuce, and broccoli. Overall, apples and carrots contained the highest levels of contamination, and fruits were found to have more plastic particles than vegetables. On dairy farms in several countries, microplastic particles have been found in samples of hay and other types of cattle feed. The presence of microplastics has also been confirmed in the milk and meat of cows and sheep, as well as in the lung tissue of pigs and in the stomachs and intestines of domestic ducks. This means that plastic has now become inseparable from livestock farming. Scientists from the University of Newcastle in Australia estimate that the average person today consumes around 250 grams of plastic per year through food, the weight equivalent of 50 plastic bags. Moreover, humans inhale micro and nanoplastics. According to studies, an adult can inhale up to 106,000 microplastic particles during a 2-hour walk in a large city. And in areas near bodies of water, that number significantly increases. We encounter micro and nanoplastic every day when we brush our teeth, take a shower, eat, run errands, go for a walk, wear our clothes, use household appliances, or take medications, and when we are working on a computer, riding public transport, drinking coffee on the go, shopping in a supermarket, or relaxing outdoors. Micro and nanoplastics are everywhere, and we barely notice how deeply these particles have become embedded in our everyday lives today.
There are 3 ways plastic gets into the body: through inhalation, through the skin, and through food. And what happens next? It enters the bloodstream. Until fairly recently, about 15 years ago, people thought plastic was inert. And in fact, if you look at these plastic pellets, not microplastics but larger macroplastics, even if you put them in water, they just sit there quietly. It seems like they don't interfere much with the environment. But once they break down into micro and nanoplastics, they get into the human body through those 3 pathways, enter the bloodstream, and from there reach all the parenchymal tissues, that is, the organs, kidneys, liver, heart, arteries, veins, placenta, breast milk.
Micro and nanoplastics have already become an inseparable part of the human body. They accumulate in the tissues of the intestines, heart muscles, and in the endocrine and reproductive organs, disrupting their functions. There isn't a single place in the human body they cannot penetrate. Studies show that the highest concentrations of nanoplastic have been found precisely in human brain tissue. Professor Lucas Kenner, a pathologist cancer researcher, director of the Christian Doppler Laboratory for Applied Metabolomics, and scientific director of the Micro-1 project studying microplastic and its effects on health, explains how micro and nanoplastic particles can evade the body's defense mechanisms and reach the brain within just a few hours.
And we found out that particles which are in the bloodstream and cover themselves with cholesterol molecules, they easily can enter the blood-brain barrier, which is a very strict body barrier and protects the brain from toxic outside or even therapeutic substances. So it's, it's difficult, for instance, to treat brain tumors because the blood-brain barrier is so strict also for medications. But particles can enter quickly because they cover themselves with molecules will help them enter the blood-brain barrier. And this is for me, it was really very striking to see that, that these particles in 2 hours after we give them an oral gavage, they're already in the brain.
Scientists at the University of New Mexico have found that in every gram of brain tissue in middle-aged individuals, there are about 4,900 micrograms of plastic. This means that today, around 0.5% of the human brain is composed of plastic. Simple calculations show that the human brain contains on average around 7 grams of plastic, roughly the weight of a plastic teaspoon. And such a teaspoon is already inside the human head. It is well known that micro and nanoplastics are dangerous because of toxic chemical additives they contain, such as phthalates and bisphenols. Treating diseases associated with just 3 chemicals of the most toxic additives found in plastics costs humanity $1.5 trillion a year. But this is only the tip of the iceberg, as overall more than 16,000 chemical compounds are used in the production of various types of plastics, each carrying its own potential risks to human health. Yet there is another factor, one far more dangerous and still vastly underestimated, in how nanoplastics affect the human body. It is precisely this factor that allows nanoplastics to easily penetrate the body's protective barriers, and once inside, they are virtually impossible to remove.
The destructive impact of plastics at the chemical level has already been examined in another documentary, A Trap for Humanity, part of which focused on the toxic additives in plastics and their devastating effects for human health. Now, the dangers from chemicals are, of course, the most visible and widely discussed part of the problem. But as our investigation continued, we realized that the true danger of plastics lie beyond the chemistry, extending much deeper into the realm of physics. To understand why plastic particles are so dangerous, we must first understand their unique physical properties.
Unique properties of plastic. At the micro and nanoscale, plastic particles acquire new physicochemical properties. They can retain surface charge for longer periods and interact with electrostatic fields and other molecules. In this sense, micro and nanoplastics can be compared to an electret, a material that accumulates static electricity and holds it for an extended time. Moreover, plastic particles not only retain an electrostatic charge, but can also recharge it. This occurs through the triboelectric effect. That is, when plastic comes into contact with or rubs against other surfaces, including fabrics, cells, and liquids. In other words, plastic particles can recharge themselves, restoring their electrostatic charge again and again.
To understand how the properties of plastic differ from those of other materials, we conducted a simple experiment. Here, inside transparent plastic cups, we suspended several objects made of different materials: a metal needle, a wooden matchstick, a copper wire, and a strip of magnesium. Now, while these objects remained motionless when a plastic rod was brought close, everything changed dramatically when we rubbed the plastic rod against the wall. That is, all the suspended object began swinging and moved toward the rod. So, what caused this reaction? The answer lies in the electrostatic charge that formed on the plastic surface. For example, a wooden rod, unlike plastic, cannot hold such a charge. even after rubbing it with wool. The material caused no movement. The same was true for metal scissors, which showed no effect until the material touched a magnet. Only then did the metal needle respond. So this experiment clearly shows how material responds differently to electric and magnetic fields. Now, plastic stands out among other materials because it can not only accumulate, but also retain electrostatic charge for a prolonged period. This is distinct from wood, which quickly dissipates charge because of its moisture content, and therefore has little effect on other nearby objects. It's a dielectric material. Metals, on the other hand, do not hold charge but quickly redistributes it across their surface. They're conductors. Magnets, meanwhile, create magnetic rather than electric fields and thus cannot attract electrically neutral objects in the way a charged plastic can. So this is what makes electrostatically charged plastic so dangerous. It is an invisible force capable of changing everything around it. Once charged, plastic can attract even neutral particles, disrupting many natural physical processes. And as plastics breaks down into smaller fragments, micro and nanoplastics, it doesn't lose its properties. In fact, the impact of plastic on the environment and living organisms only intensifies as the particles become smaller. It's the charge that makes plastic especially dangerous to all life on our planet.
Therefore, plastic cannot be regarded as passive waste. It is an active, electrically charged material capable of interacting with nearly all substances on Earth, from atmospheric particles to living cells. The smaller the plastic particle, the more active it becomes, and the more dangerous its impact.
If you view a microplastic particle and it's 5 millimeter in diameter, and you break it down to a nanoplastic particle, which is 1 micrometer in size, you generate from one particle 125 billion particles, which is the number of galaxies we have in the universe. And the surface of these particles is 5,000 times larger than the 5 millimeter particle. So this just exemplifies how big an issue the breakdown of those plastic particles in even and all the time smaller particles. And these particles have maybe total different properties than the large 5 millimeter particles. So you not only change the size, but also the surface and the properties of the particles.
Nanoplastic has an enormous surface area compared to its mass. It's like a tiny grain with the surface area of a football field. This is called a high specific surface area. The larger the surface, the greater the particle's ability to accumulate and retain electrostatic charge, and the more active sites it contains that bind proteins, metal ions, lipids, and other molecules from the surrounding environment can attach. To understand how dangerous these tiny charged particles are, let's run a simple mental experiment. For example, we have an ordinary 1.5 volt battery. If we divide it into 125 billion tiny batteries, and suppose each of them still had the same power output of 1.5 volts, their aggregate power would equal 187.5 billion volts. Imagine how much greater the voltage will become. Similar things happen with plastic. When a single fragment of plastic is divided into 125 billion particles, each carrying a charge, the amount of charge increases.
Today, millions of tons of plastic in our biosphere are constantly breaking down into smaller and smaller particles, each carrying an electrostatic charge that allows it to penetrate everywhere. Consequently, as the number of electrostatically charged plastic particles grows, an excess electrical potential builds up throughout our planet. This is a major factor disrupting the Earth's energy balance, contributing to warming of the oceans, increase in atmospheric anomalies, as well as the number and severity of natural disasters each year. Note that the warmer the ocean, the more acidic it gets, and the faster plastic breaks down into charged micro-nanoplastics. This in turn leads to greater buildup of energy on our planet, amplifying all these processes in a self-reinforcing chain reaction. In addition, the smaller the particle, the more easily it penetrates the protective barrier of living organisms, including humans, triggering various chronic diseases and killing millions of people. We'll explore all of this in detail.
In other words, plastic fragmentation does not make it safer. On the contrary, it transforms it into nanoparticles that readily penetrate living organisms.
We know so far that compared to microplastics, nanoplastics can pass through the cell membranes much easily. That means that they can go to our bloodstream, not just us animals as well, and they can be carried to certain organs, deposited there, hard to be excreted back and things like that.
This is why nanoplastic is far more dangerous than microplastic, as its capacity to accumulate electrostatic charge is significantly greater.
Due to their electrolyte behavior and small size, plastics do not remain inert particles. They become charged and transform into trillions of micro and nano killers. It is through this charge that tiny plastics can penetrate deep into living tissues and even destroy them. Today, these particles are everywhere, and they're already interfering with the delicate electrical processes in nature. Now, we often think of electricity as something artificial, confined to light bulbs, batteries, and wires. But in reality, electrical impulses are the very language of life. That is, they enable the entire biosphere to function. And it is precisely these natural processes that electrostatically charged micro and nanoplastics are now disrupting.
Universal language of nature. The universal language of nature is invisible, yet it is what connects all living beings into a single whole. Forests. In forests, tree roots are linked with fungal networks, forming a complex and interconnected system beneath the soil that scientists call the wood wide web. This network not only distributes water and nutrients, but also enables plants to exchange information. Plants communicate in two major ways: chemically, by releasing specific molecules, and electrically, by sending electrical signals similar to nerve impulses in animals and humans. For example, when insects attack, a tree generates an electrical signal that triggers defensive responses. This signal can travel through roots into the fungal network, reaching other trees. A similar effect was detected by scientists during a solar eclipse. The bioelectric signals of trees began to synchronize, forming a single impulse. The oldest trees responded first, as if they remembered such events and were warning the younger ones. Through electrical signals, plants can coordinate their growth, warn each other of danger, adapt collectively to stress, and even store shared memory. It is precisely this finely tuned system that is now being disrupted by micro and nanoplastics. Today, forests have become vast reservoirs of microplastics. Research shows that forests capture microplastic from the atmosphere. As air currents pass through forests, they carry tons of microplastic particles. The forest functions as a massive filter. Tree canopies and leaves literally comb out particles from the air. In the past, this process helped purify the atmosphere from dust and dirt. Today, however, along with these natural particles, micro and nanoplastic are also being trapped. Unlike dust, which can become part of organic matter, plastic does not decompose. It remains in leaves, accumulates in soil, and persists in forest air. Every day, dozens of microplastic particles settle on each square meter of the forest canopy. Scientists estimated the annual deposition of microplastics in forest soils and showed that it correlates with the scale of plastic production in Europe. Assuming that atmospheric fallout is the primary source, they concluded that roughly 400,000 microplastic particles per square meter could accumulate in forest soil over a 70-year period. Charged particles distort bioelectrical signals and deprive forests of their ability to adapt and survive. Negatively charged nanoparticles penetrate plant roots more easily, disrupting nutrient absorption. As a result, growth slows down and root formation is impaired. In addition, electrostatically charged micro and nanoparticles of plastic adhere to leaves and penetrate plant cells, impairing photosynthesis. They damage chloroplasts, the energy centers of plant cells, the analog of mitochondria in animal and human cells. Prolonged exposure to micro and nanoplastics reduces the ability of plants to produce oxygen. Some of the world's forests, such as the eastern forests of the Amazon, are already emitting more carbon dioxide than they produce oxygen. Animals. Micro and nanoplastics can penetrate the brains of animals. Electrostatically charged plastic particles damage brain cells and disrupt the transmission of nerve impulses. This causes malfunctions in the nervous system, from reduced vision, hearing, and smell to impaired motor coordination. As a result, animals struggle to navigate, find food, avoid danger, and to communicate with one another. And all of this greatly reduces their chances of survival. These effects mirror the early signs of neurodegenerative diseases in humans. According to the Worldwide Fund for Nature, over the past 50 years, the global population of wild animals has declined by nearly 70%. People can't even protect those they've taken responsibility for. Household pets are also poisoned by micro and nanoplastics. Pet food contains PET, the same plastic used to make bottles. Moreover, microplastic particles have been found in the tissues of cats and dogs. Scientists analyzed tissue samples from 49 animals, 24 cats and 25 dogs, that had died of natural causes and found that more than 70% of them had microplastics present in multiple organs. Insects. The rate of insect extinction is 8 times higher than that of mammals, birds, or reptiles. The crisis is especially severe for pollinators, bees, whose role in ecosystems and agriculture is critical. Wild and domesticated bees pollinate 75% of agricultural crops and 90% of wild flowering plants. More than 30% of the world's food production depends on bees. Today, populations of honeybees and wild bees are declining rapidly. If this trend continues, half of all bee populations may disappear within the next decade. The disappearance of bees means the loss of the link that connects plants and food, nature, and humanity. Studies by Indian researchers have identified a correlation between microplastic pollution and declining populations of insects. Bees interact with their environment through electrical impulses. They navigate not only by scent, color, and flower shape, but also, remarkably, by sensing a flower's electric field. When a bee approaches a flower, they communicate through the electrical field. As bees fly, friction with the air gives their bodies a positive charge, while flowers, being grounded, carry a negative charge. This difference creates an electric field that allows pollen to transfer to the bee even before it lands. Experiments have shown that bees can distinguish flowers by their electric fields, associate specific electrical signals with the presence of nectar, and even determine a flower's freshness by the strength of its residual charge. After a flower has been visited, its electric field weakens, and other bees can read the signal that the flower contains less nectar. Moreover, the bee's own electric charge can stimulate a plant to release fragrance, attracting even more pollinators. Thus, an entire electrical communication system operates between bees and flowers. The electrostatic charge carried by micro and nanoplastics distorts these electrical impulses, affecting the bee's brain and nervous system. As a result, bees can no longer recognize flowers, locate nectar, find its way home, or identify members of their colony. Even the smallest doses of microplastics can be lethal to bees. Bees are covered in sensitive hairs and constantly interact with their environment, allowing plastic particles to settle on their bodies and easily penetrate them. One of the leading experts studying the impact of microplastics on insects is Professor David Baraki, PhD in ecology and animal ethology, biologist, and head of the Cognitive and Behavioral Ecology Lab, B-Lab, at the University of Florence.
We already know from our studies and studies from other colleagues that, for instance, the microplastic can affect the gut microbiome. So if they feed with microplastics, this can generate dysbiosis, or the microbiota can be affected. In the same way, we found that it can affect the immune response. So both honeybees and bumblebees have a kind of immune depression, so they are not any longer able to fight infections. And they can also show altered behavior. So, for instance, again, learning and memory is affected, and polyethylene doesn't seem to harm too much honeybees, and polyestyrene had a strong impact not only on survival but also on learning and memory. So in our experiment, we really found that this polymer, concentration that we probably can find in environment, can actually impair memory formation and memory retrieval. And this is, of course, alarming because for honeybees, it's, as I said, it's very, very important to have a good learning and memory capabilities.
When microplastics enter a bee's body through food or air, they damage the intestine, disrupt metabolism and reproductive function, weaken the immune system, and alter their behavior, even to the point of losing the ability to navigate. Birds. Across the globe, scientists are observing an alarming trend. The number of wild birds is rapidly declining. In North America alone, over the past 50 years, approximately 3 billion birds have disappeared. That is a quarter of the entire bird population. Electrical signals play as vital a role in the lives of birds as they do throughout the entire biosphere. The avian nervous system functions through transmission of electrical signals from the brain to all parts of the body. Those impulses control movements of wings, tail, and body in flight, vision and coordination, cognitive responses, for example, evading predators, song and vocal communication. Birds are true living navigators capable of traveling thousands of kilometers and returning precisely to the same locations year after year. Scientists have discovered that many migratory birds use Earth's magnetic field for orientation. Imagine an airplane. A pilot sees a radar screen with lines and markers to avoid getting lost in the sky. For birds, their eyes serve as such a radar. Specialized molecules in their eyes detect both light and Earth's magnetic field, converting them into electrical signals. In the brain, those signals form an image with field lines superimposed on the real world. A bird simultaneously sees clouds, land, and its magnetic radar, allowing it to maintain course in any direction with ease. Electrostatically charged micro and nanoplastic particles entering a bird's body distort electrical impulses and disrupt functioning of its nervous system. This leads to loss of motor coordination, weakened memory and learning ability, and impaired vocalization and spatial orientation. Externally, this manifests as increasingly erratic flight, unstable behavior, and even softer, weakened chirping. Nestlings are especially vulnerable. Many do not survive to adulthood, and those that do often exhibit cognitive impairments. However, that's not all. Plastics damage the liver, kidneys, stomach, and brain of birds, causing symptoms that resemble Alzheimer's disease. Even birds that appear healthy lose the ability to adequately care for their partners and offspring, sharply reducing their chances of successful reproduction. Marine life. Beneath the surface reigns a unique world where vision weakens and sounds become distorted. In such conditions, marine life perceives reality differently. Through electroreception, the ability to sense faint electric fields and navigate by them. Predators such as sharks can detect tiny electrical impulses produced by muscle contractions and the heartbeat of their prey. Even if a fish remains motionless and hidden in sand, its bioelectric signals reveal its location. All living organisms in water generate continuous bioelectric fields due to ion flow across their skin. Those fields are subtly altered when the animal moves or when another living being appears nearby. Electrical impulses are an inseparable part of life itself, even underwater. Electrostatically charged micro and nanoplastics can distort or block those signals, which makes marine creatures especially vulnerable. As a result, marine animals and fish lose their ability to accurately locate prey, avoid predators, and follow migration routes. This threatens their survival and leads to population declines. Furthermore, fish exposed to microplastics exhibit a wide range of toxic effects, from immune system dysfunction to altered blood composition. Signs of neurotoxicity, growth retardation, and reduced reproductive capacity have also been documented in fish. All processes in the biosphere rely on extremely subtle electrical impulses. It is these impulses that become distorted by electrostatically charged micro and nanoplastic. Micro and nanoplastics have already permeated every environment and integrated into all ecosystems. The examples given here represent only a small part of a global problem. Disruptions are occurring throughout the biosphere without exception, and the outcome is the same everywhere. Distortion of signal transmission, breakdown of biological connections, malfunction of living systems, and ultimately, the death of life itself. Micro and nanoplastics are everywhere, and everything they touch is slowly dying.
Charged micro and nanoplastics disturb the natural biological impulses that form the very foundation of life. Gradually, they erode the mechanisms that allow the biospheres to exist and interact. This decay begins from within, slowly, almost imperceptibly, yet inevitably. Even what appears healthy and alive today is already contaminated by micro nanoplastics. Today, so many of these particles have already accumulated on our planet that they will be enough to destroy the entire biosphere several times over. And their numbers continue to grow each day. Nature is not merely a habitat. It's our breath, our nourishment, and our protection. Humanity can survive without technology, but not without air, water, and living organisms. When life on Earth dies, humanity dies with it. The truth is that we do not exist separately from nature, no matter how much we try to convince ourselves otherwise. We're part of it. So you have probably guessed who we're going to talk about next. Yes, about us.
Impulse of life. For humans, just like for all living beings in the biosphere, electrical signals are the pulse of life. The human body is, quite literally, an electrical system. The brain thinks with the help of electrical impulses. The heart beats because cells transmit electrical signals to one another, and muscles contract when they receive signals from the nervous system. Neurons play a key role in coordinating all body functions by generating and transmitting electrical impulses. How an electrical impulse is generated in neurons. Every neuron has a membrane with the so-called gates, ion channels. When a signal needs to be transmitted, some of these gates open, and ions begin moving quickly into or out of the cell. This flow of ions changes the membrane's electrical charge, creating an electrical impulse. The impulse travels along the neuron and transmits information further to other cells. How you communicate, whether you interrupt, speak quickly and emotionally, or on the contrary, whether you're apathetic. How you scroll through a news feed on your phone, whether you rush or move slowly, depends largely on the balance of ions. When this balance is disrupted, a person can become overly irritable, or, on the contrary, sluggish. Every movement and reaction of our body is based on electrical impulses in neurons and other cells. For example, if you accidentally touch a hot object, nerve fibers instantly transmit a signal to the brain, which commands the muscles. Pull your hand away. Without electrical impulses, the body wouldn't be able to maintain a stable internal state, homeostasis. Even the immune system cannot function without electrical impulses. The speed and strength of every immune cell's response depend directly on the quality of impulse transmission. Emotions and thoughts are also the language of electrical impulses. When you feel joy, sadness, excitement, love, or recall a memory, tiny electrical sparks run between neurons. They're like messages between friends. One neuron writes, another reads, and passes it on. Through these chains, thoughts, emotions, and decisions are born. When you learn something new, that too is the work of electrical impulses. They create new neural connections, as if paving little pathways in the brain that make it easier for impulses to travel later on. Even at the very beginning of life, when a sperm cell fertilizes an egg, an extraordinary phenomenon occurs. This contact triggers a cascade of biochemical reactions, including the release of billions of zinc ions. This impulse acts like a start button that activates the egg and initiates the very process from which the future embryo begins to develop.
We rarely think of ourselves as electrical systems, yet that's exactly how our bodies function. Nature created a perfect design in which countless vital processes and interactions occur through electrical impulses. But there was one thing that nature could not have foreseen: that humans would create an enemy capable of infiltrating and disrupting this perfect mechanism. In studying micro and nanoplastics, we discovered that their most dangerous weapon is invisible. It is the electrostatic charge that these particles accumulate and retain. This charge begins to destroy us from within, starting from the very foundation of life, the cell. Inside the cell, charged nanoplastics cause the greatest harm. They disrupt communications between the cells, trigger self-destruction programs, and deprive cells of their ability to generate energy for sustaining life. The question is, how do plastics do this?
How do micro and nanoplastics damage the body's cells? Disruption of interactions between neurons. Electrostatic charge and extremely small size allow nanoplastic particles to penetrate inside human cells. The impact of nanoplastics on cell function can be clearly traced in neurons, cells of the nervous system, as their function is directly linked to the generation and transmission of electrical signals. Valérie Etkin, Doctor of Physical and Mathematical Sciences and member of the European Academy of Natural Sciences, emphasizes that the impact of nanoplastics on nerve cells manifests at the most fundamental levels.
Nanoplastics significantly influence the generation and transmission of neural impulses through multiple mechanisms that disrupt ion transport and the electrical activity of neurons responsible for transmitting nerve signals in the body.
Each neuron functions like a miniature battery. It constantly maintains a difference in electrical charge between the inside and outside of its membrane. This enables the neuron to be ready to transmit a signal at the right moment. Charged nanoplastic disturbs this delicate balance, making the cell behave unpredictably. A neuron may activate prematurely, like a light flickering on without command, or conversely, fail to transmit a signal when needed. Such interference disrupts the operation of entire neural networks, like a city experiencing power outages, where neighborhoods go dark one after another, leading to a blackout. In addition, as shown by research conducted by Chinese scientists from Southern Medical University in Guangzhou, nanoplastic interferes with the operation of ion channels. Nanoplastic carrying an electrostatic charge can interact with these channels and alter their structure. As a result, the gates may fail to open or remain open for too long. This also disturbs normal signal transmission throughout the nervous system.
When electrostatic interactions occur with charged membrane lipids, they cause a redistribution of charged lipids and proteins within the membrane, which leads to impaired functionality of these lipid membranes. This results in localized changes in ion concentration and the formation of ion concentration gradients around charged particles. The function of ion pumps, which are essential for maintaining ion balance, becomes disrupted. Ion pumps are mechanisms that move substances against their concentration gradients, a process known as active transport. When these processes become unbalanced, they accumulate energy that can later be used by biological systems to perform work. And so, the work of these pumps may be disrupted, yet it's one of the core mechanisms underlying biological activity.
Signal transmission between neurons is a complex yet remarkably coordinated electrochemical communication process in which special molecules, neurotransmitters, play a crucial role. These molecules act as couriers, transferring information from one neuron to another in a strictly ordered manner. Nanoplastic particles carrying an electrostatic charge can interfere with the release of neurotransmitters or trigger their discharge without proper signaling. As a result, chaotic and false signals emerge in the brain, as if the nervous system can no longer distinguish what messages to send, when to send them, or where they should go.
Any disruption in communication between neurons inevitably affects our mental state. If you find yourself becoming forgetful or absent-minded, if you have difficulty concentrating or remembering even simple things, it may be a sign that the degradation of neural connections has already begun. Nanoplastics not only interfere with communications between neurons, but they also penetrate directly into cells and even trigger their self-destruction.
Cells start the process of self-destruction. Each cell continuously produces specific molecules known as reactive oxygen species. These molecules participate in processes of growth, division, and programmed cell death. Under normal conditions, their levels are regulated by the cell's defense system, antioxidants, acting as cleaners. Antioxidants rapidly neutralize excess reactive oxygen species, preventing them from damaging the organism. When a cell is exposed to irritants, such as infection, injury, or toxins, it produces elevated levels of reactive oxygen species, which in excess can damage vital cellular structures. This leads to oxidative stress, a kind of chemical assault within the cell. In response to damage and oxidative stress, a natural defense mechanism is activated: inflammation. Its purpose is to eliminate the source of injury and restore balance. However, in the case of electrostatically charged nanoplastic, this mechanism ceases to function properly. Plastic particles remain inside the cell and act as a continuous irritant. The inflammation does not subside and becomes chronic. As a result, DNA, proteins, membranes, and other key cellular structures are damaged. Ultimately, the cell either can no longer function properly or initiates its own self-destruction.
We've done remarkable studies and discovered that plastic embeds itself inside the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm contains organelles, small structures that keep the cell alive and functioning. Plastic gets into the cytoplasm and stays there. It becomes surrounded by a membrane. Similar to the cell membrane, the cell isolates it because it wants to destroy it. And it starts producing enzymes and other substances the cell normally uses when it's invaded by microbes, viruses, bacteria, or antigens. But unlike those natural invaders, plastic is indestructible, as we said. So the cell is essentially subjected to chronic stress, and eventually it becomes diseased.
The Microplastics Research Group at the Bolivian Catholic University in Cochabamba uses aquatic planarians, small organisms that serve as highly useful biological models. Their strong regenerative capacity makes it possible to detect early changes in cellular processes similar to those that occur in other animals. Microplastics, especially when combined with other pollutants such as metals, are already affecting living organisms. Microplastics can trigger oxidative stress, an imbalance between the production of reactive oxygen species and the body's antioxidant capacity. This oxidative stress directly affects cellular metabolism, disrupting the functions of proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids, which can lead to changes in growth, regeneration, and the overall physiology of organisms.
Thus, exposure to electrostatically charged nanoplastic leads to oxidative stress, inflammation, and consequently, the death of not only neurons, but also other types of cells.
Oxidative stress is like a fire burning inside a cell, while antioxidants are like firefighters that work to extinguish it. Note that nanoplastics act as a fuel for the fire, feeding it endlessly until the cell is consumed from within. Yet, that's not all nanoplastics do inside our cells. They also destroy the cell's power plants, the mitochondria. Every cell lives and functions thanks to the energy produced by mitochondria. That very energy powers all processes in the body, from cell division to hormone synthesis. Even the electrical impulses that we've been talking about depend on the energy from mitochondria. And it is precisely this vital source of life that charged nanoplastics attack.
Cells stop producing energy for life. Recent studies have shown that mitochondria are particularly vulnerable to the effects of nanoplastic. And that's where a cascade of processes leading to aging and disease begins. Scientists from China have discovered that the electrostatic charge and tiny size of nanoplastic particles allow them to penetrate deep into the cell and accumulate even within mitochondria, disrupting their function. Such a condition is known as mitochondrial dysfunction, a state in which mitochondria can no longer perform their essential roles. For comparison, a mitochondrion is approximately the size of a bacterium, while a nanoplastic particle is dozens of times smaller. Dr. Jeffrey Long, a radiation oncologist with many years of clinical experience and an expert on environmental exposures and their impact on human health, explains the destructive intracellular processes triggered by nanoplastic.
They can get into the cell and they can damage the critical parts of the cell, particularly mitochondria. Mitochondria in each cell in the human body is sort of the energy machine. It produces the raw stuff that provides energy to the entire rest of the cell. And it is frightening to understand, and increasingly so with increasing scientific studies, that nanoparticles nanoplastics, as they get in, are actually damaging the mitochondria, that energy-producing part of the cell. They're also damaging the part of the cell involved in division and reproduction called DNA. And certainly they can affect other molecules and proteins within the cell.
Mitochondria are the cell's energy and signaling center. They regulate metabolism, control cell growth and division, protect against oxidative stress, modulate inflammation and immune responses, and trigger programmed cell death. One of their key functions is cellular respiration, the process by which energy is produced. Energy in the human body is generated as follows. First, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates from food are broken down into simple molecules. These molecules then enter the mitochondria, where electrons are extracted from them. The electrons move along a specialized chain of proteins, much like an electric current passing through wires. This electron flow drives the mitochondrial energy machinery, resulting in the production of ATP, the universal fuel that powers all organs and tissues. A single mitochondrion can produce up to 10 million molecules of ATP per day. However, electrostatically charged nanoplastic interferes with this delicate process. Its particles disrupt movement of electrons and reduce the efficiency of ATP synthesis. It is similar to a power plant where the wiring begins to short circuit. The generator falters, energy output drops, and the entire system starts to fail more quickly. Mitochondria have their own DNA, a set of instructions for energy production. Without it, mitochondria cannot generate energy, and the cell gradually loses its power source and begins to deteriorate. Exposure to nanoplastic causes mutations to accumulate rapidly in mitochondrial DNA, further impairing mitochondrial function. Studies published in 2023 demonstrated that 50 nanometer polystyrene nanoparticles sharply reduce ATP production and increase the number of mutations in mitochondrial DNA.
We have studies on this, with dramatic images taken using a scanning electron microscope, as well as a transmission one, where you can actually see plastic destroying the mitochondria, the structures that produce a cell's energy.
Chronic exposure to nanoplastic turns cells into a battlefield. Their electrostatic charge prevents mitochondria from carrying out their essential functions, and this disruption marks the beginning of the slow decline of cells, tissues, and organs. We have now seen the key mechanisms by which charged nanoplastic particles damage cells. Each of these processes is destructive on their own, but they also occur simultaneously and amplify one another's effects. This chain reaction unleashes avalanche of damages leading to cell death, and ultimately causing systemic breakdowns and accelerating biological aging.
Micro and nanoplastics accelerate aging. We tend to think that aging begins with wrinkles, gray hair, or fatigue. But in reality, it starts deep within the cells, with mitochondrial dysfunction and failures in key biological processes. Over time, damaged and dying cells accumulate, and the body loses its ability to renew itself. Aging is the gradual wear and tear of life's internal mechanisms. Scientists identify several main mechanisms of aging, such as oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, chronic inflammation, telomere shortening, DNA damage accumulation, epigenetic alterations. These same mechanisms underlie various diseases. When mitochondria can no longer produce sufficient energy, when DNA damage accumulates, and when inflammation becomes chronic, the organism grows increasingly vulnerable. This is when conditions such as diabetes, cancer, heart attack, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease begin to develop, and they all share one root cause: the aging of cells and tissues. Here's the crucial point. Electrostatically charged nanoplastic induces the same processes: oxidative stress, DNA damage, mitochondrial dysfunction, telomere shortening, chronic inflammation, and epigenetic alterations. Thus, electrostatically charged nanoplastic artificially accelerates cellular aging. What once unfolded over decades can now progress many times faster under its influence. And we are already witnessing the consequences. Diseases are becoming younger. Scientists have found that modern generations develop illnesses earlier and accumulate more chronic conditions than their parents did at the same age. Even a difference of just a few years now translates into noticeably higher rates of disease. Cancer and hypertension remain the most common conditions. Moreover, each subsequent generation shows an increase in the number of chronic conditions in a single individual. Diseases once considered age-related are increasingly found in young people. Notably, this trend coincides with the growing plastic pollution of the environment. As a result of exposure to electrostatically charged nanoplastic, the biological cell age of people in their 20s or 30s may already correspond to that of a 50 to 60-year-old person.
So very frightening how widespread nanoplastics are everywhere, probably each and every one of our cells. Even to you talking and among the audience listening, probably all of our cells have at least some nanoplastics.
So let's summarize. Aging is a gradual breakdown of the cells in our bodies. Nanoplastics accelerate this deterioration, and thus the aging itself through all those destructive processes within the cells that we've just talked about. And here lies the crucial point. The same mechanisms that drive aging also underlie many chronic diseases. In other words, micro and nanoplastics not only speed up aging, but also contribute to the development of diseases. Today, micro and nanoplastics are detected in every organ of the human body, and everywhere, in each organ, in each cell. The tiny plastic particles trigger a cascade of internal destruction. Nanoplastics damage cell membranes, disrupt ion channels, induce oxidative stress, disable mitochondria, and provoke genetic mutations. These damages affect all cell types in the same way, whether in the heart, bones, lungs, or elsewhere. Now, we know the answer to the main question that began our investigation. Why and by what mechanism are nanoplastics capable of destroying living systems at the microscopic level? But what does that mean to us, for each of us? What specific diseases arise from such cellular destruction within the human body? The answers lie ahead in the next part of our investigation.
Micro and nanoplastics are damaging health. Micro and nanoplastics impact the nervous system.
Neurological disorders are the leading cause of physical and cognitive disability worldwide, affecting almost 3.5 billion people. Over the past 30 years, the number of such cases has risen drastically, and scientists project that within the next 2 decades, this figure could double. Since this trend mirrors a surge of plastic pollutions in our environment, it becomes clear why these diseases are becoming more prevalent and why they're increasingly affecting younger population. Now, recall the image of a plastic spoon in the brain. Unfortunately, it doesn't sit there inert or harmless. Electrostatically charged plastic particles attack neurons, the brain cells that are responsible for most of our thoughts and movements. Every day and every minute, nanoplastics are silently destroying cells in our brains, and the exposure to these tiny plastics, they never stop. In fact, it continues to accelerate. Consequently, the damage of our neurons lead to severe and often irreversible diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, stroke, and many others. But neurons are not limited to the brain. They form an extensive network that coordinates and synchronizes the activity of the entire body. And when they're damaged, the autonomic nervous system begins to malfunction, disrupting the function of internal organs. For example, the intestines contain about 500 million neurons, often referred to as a second brain. This vast network plays a vital role in digestion, immunity, and even emotional regulation. But with every sip of water and every meal, an invisible stream of micro nanoplastics enters our bodies. And unfortunately, most of these particles settle and accumulate in the intestines.
Micro and nanoplastics destroy intestinal barriers. The intestine is not just a digestive organ. About 70% of the cells in our immune system are concentrated there, which means its condition directly affects the protection of the entire body.
So another study that we provided, showed us we are actually eating plastics, microplastics, because we analyzed 26 human cadaver. We just investigate their intestinal system, their gut content, and we found like between 9 and 10 microplastic per person in their stomach. So this is like a acute exposure. At that time, they exposed that amount of microplastics because, when you eat something, it will pass through your intestinal system. Some of them will remain inside the system. This is what we found. There remain microplastic particles inside the human stomach because grams doesn't give enough information about exposure because the particles behave according to their shape rather than their mass, because the definitive transportation feature of plastics or particles is size, because all the human barriers, the gut barrier, intestinal blood barrier, they are selective for size and the type. If they smaller than certain size, like 100 micron, they can pass through through intestinal system to the blood system.
The intestinal barrier works like a filter. It allows useful substances, vitamins, nutrients, to pass through and blocks harmful ones, toxins, microbes, and foreign particles. But this entire well-coordinated system is destroyed by electrostatically charged micro and nanoplastics. It damages the cells lining the intestinal walls and weakens the tight junctions between them, making the intestinal barrier more permeable. Microbes, toxins, and plastic particles begin to penetrate the bloodstream from the intestine. In response, the immune system triggers inflammation. The intestine is also the body's second brain. Its walls contain about 500 million neurons that are directly connected to the central nervous system. This connection is called the gut-brain axis. The gut and the brain are connected through the vagus nerve. It is like a direct phone line through which they constantly exchange messages. The brain gives commands to the intestines on what to do, and the intestine informs the brain about their condition. A key role in this communication is played by the microbiota, 100 trillion beneficial bacteria. They produce substances capable of both calming and irritating the nerve endings in the intestinal wall, including those of the vagus nerve. Charged micro and nanoplastics disrupt the balance of gut microbiota. Beneficial microorganisms die, while pathogenic ones begin to multiply actively. When this happens, the communication between the gut and the brain becomes distorted. When nanoplastics enter the intestine, it triggers a vicious cycle of destruction. The damage that begins in the intestine leads to systemic malfunctions throughout the body. The digestive, immune, nervous, and endocrine systems all suffer. This accelerates the body's aging process and increases the risk of serious diseases such as irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel diseases, allergies and autoimmune diseases, depression, anxiety and cognitive disorders, obesity and diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Micro and nanoplastics destroy immunity. Researchers from the University Medical Center Utrecht discovered that immune cells exposed to nanoplastic die 3 times faster than those that are not. Such accelerated death of immune cells severely weakens immunity and reduces the body's ability to fight infections. This contributes to the spread of inflammatory reactions throughout the body. Scientists from Zhengzhou University and Henan Cancer Hospital in China have found that nanoplastics penetrate even into the bone marrow and the thymus, the organs where blood and immune cells originate and mature. The bone marrow performs 2 key functions. On the one hand, it is a blood cell factory, where red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets are formed. On the other, stem cells of the bone marrow play a role in regenerating bones, cartilage, muscles, and fat tissue. The impact of nanoplastics on stem cells means damage to the very foundation of regeneration. First, blood formation worsens. Anemia can develop due to a lack of red blood cells. Immunity decreases due to fewer white blood cells. And the risk of bleeding rises because of platelet deficiency. Second, Damage to bone cells makes bones more fragile, increasing the risk of fractures and slowing their recovery. Nanoplastics not only destroy the immune system, but through its electrostatic charge, they also create conditions for the reproduction and resilience of pathogens. A study from the University of Illinois showed that positively charged nanoplastic particles increase physiological stress in gut bacteria such as E. coli, making them more pathogenic. The electrostatic charge plays the decisive role here. It is what increases the pathogenicity of microorganisms. At the same time, nanoplastic particles without electrostatic charge did not cause physiological stress in bacteria, and their danger to humans did not increase. The experiment showed that microplastics, especially polystyrene, can absorb up to 98.6% of viruses, prolonging their survival outside the body for up to 7 days. Viruses that normally die under sunlight or oxygen within hours can persist on plastic for 2 to 7 days, remaining on surfaces such as handrails, bottles, and door handles. A single sneeze from an infected person can release up to 200 million viral particles into the air, which can land on any plastic surface indoors or bind with nanoplastic particles in the air and water. Microplastics become an air and water taxi, spreading infection. Once in the bloodstream, charged micro and nanoplastic particles quickly become coated with plasma proteins, forming a biocorona, which masks them as the body's own cells and makes them invisible to the immune system. Antibiotic resistance. In 2019, antimicrobial resistance was directly responsible for more than 1 million deaths, with nearly 5 million additional deaths linked to related complications. Studies in 2025 show that plastic helps bacteria develop resistance to antibiotics, driving a crisis that medicine is increasingly unable to control. Why? Because plastic is the perfect platform for bacterial growth. On its surface, they easily form biofilms, a dense protective layer shielding bacteria from sunlight, drying out, immune system attacks, and, most importantly, from antibiotics. Just like viruses, bacteria can survive on plastic longer than on other materials, sometimes for 3 days or more. This makes microplastic an efficient carrier of dangerous microbes through water, soil, and food. Paul Dabzak, PhD in water chemistry and microbiology, researcher at Center for Research in Exact Sciences and Engineering at the Bolivian Catholic University San Pablo, notes that the presence of biofilms on microplastics makes them even more dangerous.
In the laboratory, we study how microplastics interact with metals and microorganisms. We observe that microplastics can adsorb metals through both physical and chemical sorption processes, and that this ability increases in the presence of bacterial biofilms that develop on the surface of the particles. These interactions depend on the type of plastic and the size of the particles, which alters their electrostatic charges. This causes microplastics to act like a magnet, attracting even more contaminants to their surfaces.
In laboratory conditions, researchers from Boston University found that when bacteria come into contact with microplastic, they activate a special metabolic process linked to electron transfer. Simply put, plastic particles can share electrons with bacteria, acting as a kind of power bank for them. This process is called extracellular electron transfer. It gives bacteria extra energy, which first of all, makes them stronger, helps them divide faster, mutate, and build resilient multi-layered biofilms that block antibiotics from penetrating. Secondly, this extra energy directly accelerates antibiotic resistance. What's worse, even after plastic was removed from the experiment, bacteria retained their new properties. They mutated, became more resistant, and continued forming strong biofilms on other surfaces, even without plastic support. This means plastics may accelerate the rise and spread of the so-called superbacteria that are resistant to drug treatment. According to WHO estimates, by 2050, antimicrobial resistance will claim 10 million lives every year. Meanwhile, new antibiotics are being developed far more slowly than bacteria evolve.
So think about this. Charged microplastics not only help bacteria to survive, but they also enable them to mutate into superbacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. This discovery reshapes our perspective on plastic pollution because we now understand that the problem is far more alarming than we have previously believed. And each year, the threat of antibiotic resistance is growing. In many countries, standard drugs are already losing their effectiveness, and even common infections are becoming increasingly difficult to treat. If this trend continues, antibiotics could soon become entirely useless.
Micro and nanoplastics affect the respiratory system. The inhalation pathway of micro and nanoplastics is especially dangerous because plastic particles carrying an electrostatic charge can reach not only the lungs, but also travel directly into the brain through the olfactory pathway. Chinese researchers have estimated that in just 2 hours outdoors, an adult can inhale up to 106,000 microplastic particles, and a child about 73,000. Given the lower body mass of children, the concentration of inhaled microplastics per kilogram is on average 4 times higher in children than in adults. Once inside the respiratory tract, micro and nanoplastic particles carrying an electrostatic charge trigger a chain of destructive reactions in every cell of the bronchi and lungs. They cause oxidative stress and chronic inflammation, leading to severe consequences such as the onset and worsening of bronchial asthma, progression of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, pulmonary fibrosis, in which healthy lung tissue is replaced by scar tissue, and an increased risk of malignant tumors of the respiratory tract. In a study conducted in 2021, microplastics were found in 13 out of 20 lung tissue samples. In patients with respiratory diseases, particles were found in every sample of throat phlegm. What's more, plastic fibers have been discovered in malignant lung tumors. According to the World Health Organization, lower respiratory tract infections remain the world's deadliest infectious disease and rank among the top 5 leading causes of death. Cancer of the trachea, bronchi, and lungs ranks 6th among the leading causes of death. Micro and nanoplastics disrupt the functioning of the heart and blood vessels. Cardiovascular diseases are the leading cause of death worldwide. Despite tremendous efforts by the scientific community to develop and introduce innovative treatments, both the incidence and mortality from these diseases continue to rise. How do micro and nanoplastics damage the heart and blood vessels? The main thing electrostatically charged nanoplastics do is they destroy the mitochondria inside our cells. The heart is one of the body's most energy-demanding organs, and it's the mitochondria, the energy producers, that give it the power for every single beat. And when mitochondria start to malfunction, the heart literally stalls. It no longer has enough energy to maintain a normal rhythm or strong contractions. Heart attacks and strokes remain the world's leading causes of death among all diseases. In this context, it's especially alarming that scientists have found micro and nanoplastics inside atherosclerotic plaques, dense deposits within arterial walls that narrow the vessels and can obstruct blood flow. When a vessel becomes constricted or a clot forms, blood circulation to the heart or brain is disrupted, sharply increasing the risk of a heart attack or stroke. Research shows that when microplastics are present in carotid artery plaques, the risk of these life-threatening events and fatal outcomes rises by 4.5 times. Micro and nanoplastic particles trigger blood clot formation. When micro and nanoplastics enter the bloodstream, they don't simply drift there passively. Because of their electrostatic charge, plastic particles stick to vessel walls and attract blood proteins and cells. These coated particles damage the endothelium, the ultra-thin layer of cells lining the inside of blood vessels. The endothelium is like an intelligent shell of the vessels. It regulates their dilation and constriction, controls blood clotting, and protects against inflammation. However, under the influence of micro and nanoplastics, this system breaks down, leading to chronic inflammation and an increased risk of thrombosis. In addition, electrostatically charged microplastics can interact with blood cells, platelets and red blood cells, disrupting their normal behavior. Under normal conditions, red blood cells carry a negative surface charge called the zeta potential, which keeps them from sticking together and allows blood to flow freely, even through the tiniest capillaries. But when exposed to microplastics, this charge decreases. Red blood cells begin to clump together, blood viscosity rises, and clot formation starts. As a result, clots appear in the vessels, obstructing blood flow, which is especially dangerous for the brain, heart, and eyes. This consequently increases the risk of chronic fatigue, vision disorders, hypertension, heart attack, and stroke.
Nanoplastics interact with cell membranes. Positively charged nanoparticles are strongly attracted to negatively charged components, leading to disruption of membrane integrity, for example, in red blood cells, platelets, and endothelial cells.
Micro and nanoplastics induce the development of cancer.
The rise in cancer rates worldwide is absolutely frightening. I think it's very legitimate to call it an epidemic. The statistics are sobering. The World Health Organization estimated that in 2020, worldwide there was about 18.1 million new cases of cancer, whereas in 2022, just 2 years later, it's gone from 18.1 million up to nearly 20 million. And in fact, according to the World Health Organization, if this trend continues, by 2050, worldwide there's going to be 33 to 35 million new cases of cancer, truly an epidemic and truly a real major health issue affecting every single person everywhere in the world. So yes, that's a huge problem.
For a long time, cancer was considered a disease of old age, the result of accumulated DNA mutations, weakened immunity, and years of exposure to carcinogens. But today, because of nanoplastic exposure, mutations can begin to build up in the body at much earlier stages of life.
There's an increased rate of cancer worldwide in children and also in people much younger than I used to see. So what's going on now is that we're having a rise in people getting cancer, children, young adults, and it's probably not due to smoking or alcohol or anything. There seems to be something else, something in the environment that is causing this cancer at an alarming rate, and it's getting worse. So a very serious problem, yes. And again, one of the possibilities that could be accounting for this, we'll be talking more about it, is indeed nanoplastics.
We observe in the last 30 years that in some countries we observe early onset cancerogenesis, so that tumors are diagnosed more early than previously. So that things like colorectal cancer are observed earlier and diagnosed earlier than 30 years ago in average.
A key role in tumor development may be played by mitochondrial dysfunction, caused by exposure to nanoplastics. This happens through the accumulation of mutations in mitochondrial DNA and the disruption of normal cell death mechanisms, which together reduce the body's ability to eliminate damaged cells and increase the likelihood of these cells transforming into tumor cells.
So these tumor cells are very aggressive, and normally they don't take anything up which they cannot use. So, I mean, what could happen? I mean, this is hypothetically that they can produce some energy out of these plastics, or somehow some pathways are activated which are helping the cells to to move faster. That could be. So we need to investigate that. So it's a very important question, and we are basically on that to find out what happens mechanistically in those cells, that they can use plastics to facilitate their migratory potential.
Nanoplastics increase levels of reactive oxygen species in organ cells and tissues, causing oxidative stress that accelerates the growth of cancer cells, helps them spread to other tissues, stimulates formation of new blood vessels, enhances inflammation, and weakens the immune system. Moreover, the high level of oxidative stress caused by electrostatically charged nanoplastics promotes the survival of tumor cells and reduces their sensitivity to therapy, making malignant cells more aggressive.
Anything that damages the normal cell DNA that is responsible for the growth and division of cells, that damage can contribute to that cell becoming malignant, growing and dividing and spreading uncontrollably. That's what cancer is. And that is certainly a concern about the effect of nanoplastics. And then above and beyond that, because nanoplastics affect so much of the cell's function, the oxygenation, the ability of a cell to function, above and beyond that, I'm concerned as a doctor that treats cancer that nanoplastics may be reducing the effectiveness of our cancer treatments. I'm a physician that treats cancer with radiation therapy, so I am concerned about nanoparticles adversely affecting the use of radiation therapy to control cancer. And there's actually been some preclinical research on this that does suggest that the nanoparticles, and certainly contributed to by the typical negative charge that they have, in addition to adversely affecting cells, can actually reduce the effectiveness of radiation therapy. There's certainly a significant theoretical reason to believe that the nanoparticles may reduce the effectiveness of cancer treatments, not only my modality of radiation therapy, but certainly I have the same concern about therapy or other systemic treatments or immunotherapy.
Research by the Medical University of Vienna has shown that micro and nanoplastic particles remain inside cells far longer than previously believed, as they are passed on to newly formed cells during division. In addition, there are also early indications that these plastic particles may play a role in tumor metastasis.
So that's one of the problems, that the tumor grows very quickly and then also disseminates. And what we observed is that these particles are kept by the cells even after cell division, and then they are helping the cells to migrate quicker, so they can move quicker. And that's a property which we also observe in tumor cells when they are in the body, so that they can move to other places and even metastasize. And so we have to assume that also in the body, that these tumor cells can basically use those plastics to proliferate and move around in the body. When I came to this plastic topic, I thought myself, that this is, we introduce here material which is potentially toxic, potentially accumulating over the years, over the decades of the centuries, so maybe for a very long time, affecting our health, but also the evolution. I not only mean the cancer evolution of how cancers originate, but even the evolution of new species and the evolution of the whole ecosystems.
Nanoplastics affect every system in the human body. They act as a trigger, setting off a cascade of processes that lead to serious illnesses, all because of their electrical charge. Today, we know that nanoplastics play a significant role in the development of conditions that have become the leading causes of death worldwide. It may seem that the humanity has already faced its greatest threats: antibiotic resistance, autoimmune and neurodegenerative diseases, and cancer. Yet, there is something even more frightening than disease itself. Imagine living an ordinary life, feeling healthy, full of energy, going to gym, delivering a presentation, meeting friends. But then, a moment later, one suddenly dies. The body stops functioning as if someone has switched the lights off.
Is there a link between MNPs and sudden death syndrome? Sudden adult death syndrome remains one of the most troubling and unexplained medical mysteries. A person may show no signs of illness, yet their life ends abruptly, leaving doctors and loved ones without an answer to the question, why? According to the World Health Organization, sudden arrhythmic death claims about 5 million lives worldwide every year. In Europe and the US, it accounts for up to 20% of adult deaths from cardiovascular disease. Traditionally, the main causes have been hidden heart conditions, coronary artery disease, arrhythmia, cardiomyopathy. But in recent years, researchers' attention has increasingly been drawn to a new risk factor: exposure to micro and nanoplastics. In order to understand how nanoplastics can trigger processes that can lead to sudden death, let's recall what they can do. As we know, the most destructive property of nanoplastic is the electrostatic charge on its surface, which allows these particles to interfere with the transmission of electrical impulses between cells and distort the signals that coordinate the function of organs and the body as a whole. And because this same electrostatic charge can also disrupt mitochondrial function in every cell, leading to energy deficiency, inflammation, and ultimately cell death, the greatest danger arises in the most energy-consuming organs, the brain and the heart, where such disruptions can trigger sudden death syndrome. Our brain controls breathing and heart function through precise electrical impulses. If nanoplastic blocks or distorts these signals, the heart can cease to beat or breathing can stop. And this breakdown is not sudden. It results from a gradual accumulation of disruptions. That is, the signals from the brain's cardiovascular center become increasingly distorted and unstable, step by step, impairing the transmission of electrical impulses within the heart muscle. While this initially appears as arrhythmias, the heart beating too fast, too slowly, or irregularly, these malfunctions worsens and eventually reach a critical threshold, at which point the rhythm collapses and the heart stops. To those nearby, it may seem instantaneous, but in reality, the failure has been long developing over time. A similar process affects breathing. Signals from the brain's respiratory center, under the influence of nanoplastic's electrostatic charge, become progressively more erratic. After the critical threshold is crossed and the brain's commands can no longer get through, breathing stops entirely. In other words, sudden death is the final outcome of a gradual dysregulation of the heart and breathing, a process that silently progresses until it crosses a point of no return. And while we go about our daily routines making plans for the future, nanoplastics continue to damage our bodies cell by cell, day after day.
It is terrifying to realize how severely nanoplastics affect the human body. Even more disturbing is the fact that we cannot control our exposure to them. Nanoplastics enter our bodies constantly through the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat. This has already become our everyday reality. Today, we know that nanoplastics can disrupt the control centers in our brains for breathing and heartbeat, causing arrhythmias, bronchospasm, and pulmonary edema, which can result in sudden death. Yet, what's more alarming is how little we still know. Research on nanoplastics has only just begun, and we're only starting to grasp the true scale of this threat. But make no mistake, everything you have heard so far isn't science fiction. These are actual biological mechanisms triggered by electrostatically charged nanoplastics. They attack every system of our body, contributing to chronic illnesses and even causing a sudden death. But their impact reaches beyond the current generation. These nanoplastics are already affecting our children and even our ability to bring new life into the world.
Micro and nanoplastics destroy reproductive health. Current scientific evidence strongly indicates that mitochondrial dysfunction may be a root cause of infertility in both men and women, as well as negatively affecting conception, pregnancy, and embryonic development. For men, fertility depends on producing a sufficient number of healthy sperm cells that not only survive, but also possess adequate motility and the necessary energy to reach and fertilize an egg. That energy comes from mitochondria, which provides the ATP required for sperm movement. When mitochondrial function, however, is damaged or becomes unstable, sperm motility decreases, and even shape and structure of sperm cells can be altered, directly reducing the ability to conceive. From 1973 to 2018, the global sperm count in men declined by more than 60%.
We have maybe here two important points if it comes to fertility, because it's not, it's the additives definitely, and we know that for quite some time that additives have endocrine disrupting or may have endocrine disrupting properties, and that can influence the fertility, but also they can be part of the particles themselves, because the particles, you know, in many ways can have already added these endocrine disruptors, or they can also have them as the corona, so they can integrate them into the surface of the particles and then enter the body via the particles as a Trojan horse, basically. So you can have both ways.
In studies conducted by Chinese scientists, microplastic was found in every semen sample. Its impact on sperm cells is both rapid and destructive. Within just 30 minutes of exposure, mitochondrial function is disrupted and DNA damage begins. This reduces sperm viability and makes conception nearly impossible. Animal studies have shown that micro and nanoplastics can accumulate in the testes, cause testosterone deficiency, and impair spermatogenesis. Micro and nanoplastics disrupt erectile function. Insufficient testosterone production can lead to infertility, reduced libido, erectile dysfunction, and in adolescence, delayed sexual development. Producing testosterone requires large amounts of energy in the form of ATP. Even small amounts of electrostatically charged nanoplastic entering the mitochondria can disrupt their function and decrease ATP production. This, in turn, can lower testosterone levels by 60 to 70%. Such a drop impairs blood flow in the corpora cavernosa, the structures of the penis responsible for erection. As a result, this leads to erectile dysfunction and ultimately to impotence. In addition, electrostatically charged nanoplastic interferes with nerve impulse transmission, which means that even in a state of sexual arousal, an erection does not occur. This has been confirmed by research from Anhui Medical University in China. In animals with chronic microplastic intoxication, erectile function was impaired after just 1 month. Results of a national study in Japan showed that erectile function and sexual activity are declining among the younger generation. Every third man in Japan, which is about 14 million individuals, suffers from erectile dysfunction. Moreover, young Japanese men, particularly those aged 20 to 24, exhibited decreased sexual desire, weak erections, difficulty reaching orgasm, and low levels of sexual satisfaction. In fact, the prevalence of erectile dysfunction in the 20 to 24 age group was 26.6%, which is almost equal to the 27.8% observed in men aged 50 to 54. This alarming trend is not confined to Japan only. Global research confirms that symptoms of erectile dysfunction affect up to 75% of men worldwide, showing that this condition is widespread and can impact men of any age in any region. In 1995, more than 152 million men worldwide suffered from erectile dysfunction. According to scientists' estimates, within 30 years, this number will approximately double.
So think about it. If just one signal fails, the movement will not occur, a thought will not form, and an emotion will not arise. The same is true even for the most intimate aspect of human life. Everything depends on the precise coordination between neural and vascular connections. And it is this delicate connection that charged nanoplastics disrupt. Erectile dysfunction is no longer a rare condition. It has become a widespread reality, with symptoms now observed in 75% of men worldwide. Imagine jumping with a parachute that has 75% chance of not opening. Would you take that leap? That's how most of men feel today.
The situation with female fertility is no less alarming. A 2025 study revealed the presence of microplastic particles in the follicular fluid of ovaries in 14 out of 18 women, with an average of more than 2,000 particles per milliliter. These data indicate that micro and nanoplastic particles can cross the blood follicle barrier. After entering the ovaries, micro and nanoplastic particles affect the egg cell and disrupt key mechanisms essential to the health of the female reproductive system. One of the most critical of these mechanisms is mitochondrial function. Each egg cell contains between 100,000 and 600,000 mitochondria, and the energy they produce is vital at every stage, from egg cell formation and maturation to fertilization, and the subsequent growth and development of embryonic tissues. Mitochondrial dysfunction caused by exposure to nanoplastics can impair egg cell maturation, reduce the likelihood of successful fertilization, and even lead to developmental arrest of the embryo. Accumulation of nanoplastics in reproductive organs can be one of the main causes of infertility. According to the World Health Organization, today, about 17.5% of adults, that is, about 1 in 6 people in the world, face infertility. Given the global spread of plastic pollution, Professor of Environmental Medicine and Reproductive Health, Dr. Shanna Swan predicts that by 2045, the world's population may become completely infertile. Micro and nanoplastics affect the emergence of life. During pregnancy, a woman's body creates ideal conditions for the growth and protection of the fetus. However, even the placenta, the body's primary barrier between mother and child, cannot stop plastic nanoparticles from crossing through. A research team led by Antonio Ragusa made a landmark discovery when they detected microplastic particles in the human placenta for the first time. Their findings showed that plastic can penetrate a place where no artificial material had ever been found before, the very environment where new life begins.
I was in a wonderful place in Italy, in Sardinia, a place called Piscinas, in Sulcis, in the southwest of Sardinia, where the old mining areas are. It's a very remote, beautiful spot where there's nothing around for 6 or 7 kilometers. While I was walking, I suddenly saw these bright, colorful, sparkling things on the beach. I asked my wife, "What is this?" She looked at me a little puzzled and said, "Well, it's plastic." I said, "Plastic? How could plastic get here when there's nothing for 7 or 8 kilometers in any direction?" She looked at me again, with an expression that made it clear how little I understood, and said, "It comes from the sea, of course." And that's when something clicked in my mind. If plastic can spread through the ocean and end up in such untouched places, then it could also reach the inside of the womb, and so inside the bodies of babies. Naturally, from that intuition, I started pursuing this line of research. I'm a gynecologist. I help deliver babies. So I knew about plastics as much as everyone else, until a certain point. But I began reading and studying, and I reached out to some scientists who worked with microscopes. One of them was a brilliant professor working on the opposite side of Italy, in the Marsh region. she used a Raman microscope. A Raman microscope allows you to examine tissues and determine whether they have plastics inside them. Now we call it plastics, for simplicity. But of course, the term plastics covers a wide range of materials. There are dozens and dozens of different plastics. Let's say they are tiny pieces, polymers, that is, infinitely repeated tiny pieces of certain materials that we use every day, throughout the day. So we sent placentas to this professor, and she did an excellent job. She was able to locate and identify plastics inside placentas for the first time. The article we published in 2021 caused a bit of a scandal because the idea of plastics inside the placenta, inside our babies, was shocking to people. Because the plastic we find in the oceans is the same plastic we ultimately find in children.
Micro and nanoplastics affect a child in the womb. Plastic triggers inflammation and disrupts blood flow in the placenta. This means the fetus receives less oxygen and fewer nutrients, increasing the risk of intrauterine growth restriction, hypoxia, and preterm birth.
The more plastic there is in the placenta, the more likely it is that babies, unfortunately, are born prematurely. And these babies also tend to be smaller compared to those with lower levels of plastic exposure. We have to recognize that premature birth is the main problem facing humans today. In Italy, it's about 7%. In the United States, where the healthcare system is clearly less effective than Italy's, 12% of babies are born prematurely. So, in this sense, an increase in this number would mean an even greater burden for humanity, biologically, for families, and for everyone involved, and of course, economically, for those who care about costs.
We know that these particles can be taken up by these particles going through the placenta and then being found in the embryo, and therefore indicating that already in very early life we have an exposure also to the embryo.
The electrostatic charge carried by nanoplastics is especially dangerous in embryonic tissues, where even minor disruptions can lead to developmental abnormalities. In other words, nanoplastics begin harming the child's body even at the very earliest stages of its formation. Over the past 2 decades, physicians have documented an alarming increase in congenital birth defects. For instance, Chinese researchers have found that in China, the rate of such defects has nearly tripled. Similar trends have been observed in other countries. One of the fastest-growing congenital abnormalities in newborns is gastroschisis, a defect of the anterior abdominal wall in which loops of the intestine and sometimes other organs protrude through an opening in the abdominal cavity. The prevalence of this defect has increased over the past 3 decades. For instance, in the United States between 1995 and 2012, the percentage increase in gastroschisis ranged from 68% to 263%. An increasing number of children are also being born with hypospadias, a condition in which the urethral opening in boys is located in an abnormal position. In the United States, the incidence of hypospadias has risen by approximately 17% over the past 20 years. A recent growing number of cases involving congenital heart defects, Down syndrome, and other developmental anomalies have also been reported. Impact of micro and nanoplastics on children after birth. After birth, children continue to be exposed to micro and nanoplastic particles. Plastic baby bottles, food packaging, and toys are all sources of contamination. When a baby bottle containing warm water is shaken, up to 16 million microplastic particles per liter can be released. Hot water and sterilization further accelerate this process. As a result, infants are exposed daily to millions of microplastic particles and trillions of nanoplastics. Scientists have even detected microplastic in human breast milk. Research has shown that nearly 40% of breast milk samples, one of the most essential sources of infant nutrition, already contain hazardous plastic microparticles. Due to their higher metabolic rate and breathing frequency, children take in more air, water, and food per unit of body weight than adults. Consequently, at the same level of environmental contamination, their bodies absorb higher doses of microplastic. Moreover, the protective barriers in a child's body are not yet fully developed. This means plastic particles can penetrate tissues more easily and accumulate at higher concentrations. For example, in children under 2 years of age, the ethmoid bone is not yet fully formed, and its openings are wider, allowing plastic particles to pass more easily through the olfactory nerves directly into the brain.
Plastic is an infiltrator, and it's mainly children who are affected by it. In our scientific article that drew a lot of attention and was widely cited, we called them cyborg babies, meaning babies who are made of organic material, but also inorganic material like plastic. These babies are smaller. They generally have smaller brains, and very few end up with lower levels of plastic in their bodies. They're not completely free of it, since plastic is everywhere, but with lower levels of plastic.
Because of the electrostatic charge of micro and nanoplastic particles, as well as the presence of bisphenols and phthalates, the endocrine and reproductive systems of children are particularly vulnerable. These substances interfere with the formation and development of the reproductive organs, potentially leading to infertility later in life. Given scientific projections that by 2045 humanity could face widespread infertility, children born after 2020 may have a high likelihood of being unable to conceive their own offspring.
I have 2 little daughters, and for me personally, everything we have just heard is terrifying. The truth is that we still don't fully understand the catastrophic consequences of our children being exposed to micro nanoplastics. Or, as Dr. Ragusa put it, they have become cyborg children. We're only beginning to grasp the full scale of this reality. And it is truly heartbreaking to look at small children and realize that they may never be able to have children of their own. Not to mention that their lives are already at risk today.
The immune system is also at risk. In early childhood, it is still learning to distinguish between friends and foes. Exposure to microplastics can disrupt this process, increasing the risk of allergies, eczema, food intolerances, and even autoimmune diseases.
But it also has long-term consequences by which cell programming determines diseases that will then manifest themselves when a person reaches adulthood. That is, at 40 or 50 years of age. And these are diseases that are currently overwhelming, if not outright damaging, our world. They're the so-called non-communicable diseases: obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and metabolic syndrome.
A child's brain is especially vulnerable in the first years of life, a critical period of rapid nervous system development when neurons are formed and complex neural connections are established. However, electrostatically charged nanoplastic can interfere with these delicate processes by inducing inflammation, damaging immature nerve cells, and impeding their development. As a result, memory, attention, and learning abilities may be impaired, and emotional instability can arise. Over time, this may manifest as anxiety, learning difficulties, and episodes of aggression. In addition, studies indicate a potential link between exposure to micro and nanoplastic and the development of autism spectrum disorders. Given the breadth of damage that electrostatically charged micro and nanoplastics can inflict on the human body, the scientific community may need to examine their possible role in the rapid rise of autism more closely.
For me as a father, it is heartbreaking to realize how truly defenseless our children are. Micro and nanoplastics start affecting them from the very moment of conception, persist throughout fetal development, and continue their impact after birth. Unfortunately, the illnesses that we have already discussed are not the only conditions that micro and nanoplastics can trigger in children. According to statistics, Sudden infant death syndrome is among the leading causes of mortality in infants under 1 year old. This is when a seemingly healthy baby dies unexpectedly, and the cause remains unknown even after all examinations. The number of such tragedies is rising rapidly. In the United States, for example, the number of sudden infant deaths has increased by 12% between 2020 and 2022. It is unbearably tragic when there's no way to protect a child.
Micro and nanoplastics and sudden infant death syndrome. Since nanoplastics can cause chronic inflammation in any tissue they penetrate, they can disrupt the formation of neural connections even before birth, including in the regions of the fetal brain that control breathing and heart function. After birth, the damaging influence of electrostatically charged nanoplastics continues. An infant's nervous system is still developing and remains highly unstable. Therefore, even minor disturbances in signal transmission can lead to respiratory or cardiac arrest. These very functions are often impaired in infants who die from sudden infant death syndrome. Moreover, when micro and nanoplastics damage mitochondria, the affected cells begin producing less energy. To compensate for this deficit, they increase the number of copies of mitochondrial DNA and expand their population of mitochondria. Studies have shown that children who died from sudden infant death syndrome had a significantly higher number of mitochondrial DNA copies in their cerebral cortex compared with control groups, suggesting that this number may serve as a biomarker in cases of sudden infant death syndrome. Thus, exposure to micro and nanoplastics may be a key factor in the development of sudden infant death syndrome, as well as in a range of pathologies that contribute to premature infant mortality.
We are unable to protect ourselves, and worst of all, our children from the effects of micro and nanoplastics. While modern diagnostic equipment capable of accurately identifying the true causes of disease and death is still not available everywhere, we can say with high degree of confidence that nanoplastics contribute to the development of many illnesses and may accelerate their progression. In those rare cases where detailed postmortem examinations were conducted, researchers have found significant amounts of micro nanoplastic particles precisely in the affected organs and tissues. For example, in brain tissues, atherosclerotic plaques, malignant tumors, and other pathological formations. But despite millions of deaths every year, such investigations into the presence of these plastic particles are carried out only in isolated cases. There are two main reasons for this. First, many laboratories simply lack the equipment required to reliably detect micro and nanoplastics. Second, doctors and researchers, they rarely consider the possibility that these particles could potentially influence the development or outcome of the disease. Consequently, medical reports continue to list familiar diagnoses, although behind them may lie an overlooked factor: the impact of micro and nanoplastics on the human body. I understand that hearing this part of our investigation may have been very difficult. It was for me as well, believe me. But the impact of micro nanoplastics on all of us is not something we can continue to ignore. This is a crisis already underway, one that remained unnoticed for so long because the threat has been working silently within. Every day, and I'm not talking about every year or every month, but every single day, the amount of micro and nanoplastics around us continues to increase. Large plastic waste constantly breaks down into smaller particles, and these particles eventually enter our bodies through the food we eat, the water we drink, and the air we breathe. This means that with every meal, every sip of water, and every breath, huge quantities of nanoplastics enter our bodies and begin their destructive work. Their harmful effects on our cells grow in direct proportion to their concentration. And this is a scientific fact. What's even more alarming is that today, there is already so much micro nanoplastics accumulated in the ocean that it will be enough to destroy the entire biosphere, including humans, at least 3 times over. When we hear about threats of such magnitude, our instinct is to run away from them. And I understand that. It may feel like the only logical response is to eliminate plastic from our lives completely, or better yet, to take our family and move to some pristine corner of our planet. But would that really solve the problem? In fact, where could we possibly go to escape micro and nanoplastics?
Finding solutions. Exclusion zones.
One of the essential things is the environment we live in, and plastic is one of the most important factors shaping it.
Micro and nanoplastics have now infiltrated every corner of the planet, yet their distribution is far from uniform. Some regions accumulate especially high concentrations of plastic particles, and nowhere is this more pronounced than in the oceans. Each year, roughly 11 million tons of plastic waste enter the ocean. The equivalent of an Eiffel Tower made entirely of plastic plunging into the sea every 8 hours, or about 1,100 such towers annually. Initially, these towers consist of bottles, bags, fishing nets, and other plastic garbage. Over time, under the influence of sunlight, waves, and weathering, they fragment into billions of invisible killers, micro and nanoplastic particles. According to research, about 95% of small debris less than 5 millimeters in size is composed of plastics. The surface of the world's oceans is already covered with more than 350 trillion particles of microplastics, and the number continues to grow rapidly. However, the ocean depths hold countless trillions more, forming an invisible yet enormous area of contamination. And yet, that's not all. The sea breeze has become toxic. When waves break at the ocean surface, they generate countless bubbles. As these bubbles burst, they release not only salt crystals into the air, but also microscopic plastic particles. Carried by the wind, micro and nanoplastics scatter across the planet. The stronger the wind and the higher the sea foam, especially during storms, the more particles lifted into the atmosphere. Though invisible to the naked eye, the air around us is literally saturated with them. Each year, approximately 136,000 tons of microplastics are carried from the ocean to land by sea breeze. That is more than 370 tons every single day. In the atmosphere, plastics are transported thousands of kilometers by air currents. They settle in dew and fall to the ground with snow and rain. The coasts and coastal regions are the first to bear the impact.
When people go to this seashore, okay, for holiday, for swimming, to receive some sunlight, they always send me pictures of microplastics because all the seaside are full of microplastics.
A study conducted in a coastal city in eastern China found that a person can inhale up to 1 million microplastic particles per year simply by spending time outdoors. The greatest danger comes from particles smaller than 100 micrometers, which can easily enter the respiratory tract.
Because most of the coastal countries in the Mediterranean Sea don't have proper waste management system, so they release many huge amount of plastic waste into the Mediterranean Sea. This is the first reason. The second reason, we have 2 rivers in here in this part of the Mediterranean Sea, Seyhan and Ceyhan. These 2 rivers, in 2 of the 5 most polluted rivers in the Mediterranean Sea. Recycling actually makes those 2 rivers most polluted rivers in the Mediterranean Sea. They carry more than 5,000 tons of plastic waste into Mediterranean Sea every year. It's too much. And also, the coastline in the Turkish coast has pollution like 31 kilogram per kilometer per day. Every day, 31 kilogram of plastic waste reach that coast in 1 kilometer coastline. It's too much. Just imagine, one plastic bottle is 10 gram or 15 gram. You can imagine how many plastic bottle, strand on those coastlines.
Dr. Sarju Ganatra is a cardiac oncologist and director of the Cardiac Oncology Program at Lehigh Hospital and Medical Center. He leads research at the intersection of cardiovascular medicine, oncology, and environmental sustainability. According to his study, which was presented to the American Academy of Neurology, living in coastal areas is associated with an increased risk of brain and mobility disability. The reason for this is the high concentration of microplastics in the water, air, and soil of these regions.
It's alarming, truly, that what we are seeing, that people living close to the coastal water with high amount of microplastic concentration in the seawater, they have higher prevalence, higher rates of various cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, and other metabolic conditions, as well as cognitive mobility and self-caring disabilities and abilities to live independently essentially are less in that population.
Researchers analyzed health data from residents of 218 coastal counties across the United States, comparing CDC reports with levels of environmental microplastic pollution. The findings are striking. Memory and cognitive impairments occurred 9% more often among residents of areas with high concentrations of micro and nanoplastics compared to those in areas with low concentrations. Motor disorders were 6% more frequent. Difficulties with self-care, such as dressing or maintaining hygiene, were 16% more common. Inability to live independently, including managing finances or shopping, was 8% more frequent.
In coastal regions, where the concentration of micro and nanoplastics far exceeds that found in inland, people are already paying the price, not only with their health, but with their lives. In a study led by Dr. Sarju Ganatra, scientists compared regions with high and low levels of microplastic pollution. But this raises an important question. That is, what does low level mean today? To answer this, let's look at the numbers. Dr. Ganatra defined a low level of contamination as one tiny plastic particle per 200 bathtubs filled with seawater. At first glance, that might sound negligible. But when that single particle breaks down into nanoscale fragments, the number of particles increases not by tens or hundreds, but by millions of times. Let's consider a simple calculation. Suppose the volume of one such tiny plastic particle is just 1 cubic millimeter, roughly the size of a grain of sand. Over time, it breaks down into many smaller pieces. Now, if we assume that this single microparticle disintegrates into fragments about 100 nanometers in diameter, that would generate about 1 trillion particles. And if their size decreases to 10 nanometers, the number would skyrocket to 10 to the 15th, or 1 quadrillion nanoparticles, all from a single microparticle. So what does this mean in practice? It means that even one glass of such clean water, which hardly exists anymore, would potentially contain about 5 million nanoplastic particles. And for the human body, after drinking just one glass, at least 5 million cells will be put at risk. So can this so-called low level of contamination truly be considered safe? Each of those 5 million particles entering a body can trigger inflammation, cause hypoxia, and disrupt communication between neurons. Note that these effects aren't always immediately noticeable. A mild headache, occasional fatigue, anxiety, or difficulty concentrating. All these may be early warning signs of cognitive decline, neurodegenerative diseases, disability, and ultimately, death. These symptoms are particularly evident among people who live or spend significant time near the coastal regions. And the decline in their health is an early warning sign. a reflection of a much larger crisis unfolding across the world. Do you remember Professor Gundoğdu saying that the coastal countries of the Mediterranean don't have an adequate waste management system? Well, according to research, the concentration of microplastics in this region is about 4 times greater than North Pacific Ocean, where, by the way, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is located. And in addition to 5 already known invisible garbage patches, researchers have identified a 6th garbage patch hidden in the Mediterranean Sea. It's called invisible because it consists mostly of microplastics. And unlike other oceanic garbage patches, which are at least far away from the densely populated coastline, this one is surrounded by 21 countries. It's a home to nearly 500 million people. We can say that this is the most dangerous garbage patch of the planet, because here, the plastic has already broken down into small sizes that are dangerous for life. Everyone living in the Mediterranean is constantly breathing air with an extremely high concentration of micro-nanoplastics. This is an extremely dangerous zone that should have been long ago been designated as an exclusion zone. Now, recall the battery example and imagine how many charged particles are present and how much energy is concentrated there. That's why the Mediterranean Sea is warming faster than the rest of the world's oceans. This is very serious because Mediterranean plays a key role in shaping the climate of Europe and the Mediterranean countries. It affects the weather patterns, rainfall distribution, and even the ecosystems of the entire region. It is precisely this extreme warming here, driven by micro and nanoplastics, that is intensifying the climate anomalies, extreme weather events, and even natural disasters throughout the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the amount of micro and nanoplastics continue to rise with every passing minute. And what worries me personally is that people do not know this and continue traveling to these regions, often with their children, thinking that they're going there to rest and recharge, when in reality, they're entering a zone of extreme danger. So the things that once symbolized health, freedom, and luxury, a yacht on an open water, a villa by the sea, or even a private island in the ocean, they're now slowly turning into exclusion zones. For now, this problem is mainly recognized by scientists, but it will soon become impossible for the public to ignore. And when that moment comes, mass migration from coastal regions will be inevitable. Thus, if we fail to find a solution, the economic losses will be enormous, as the tourism industry will collapse and luxury resorts on the coast will be deserted. Yet, the threat doesn't end there, because the tiny plastics are constantly spreading by the atmospheric circulation and contaminating everything in its path.
Borders just for human, not for particles. So all these small microplastics can travel long distances.
We have done experiments on the samples in Siberia, on samples in the north and south and polar regions, and we found in many of those we found nanoplastics. So most of the areas that are considered pristine are at least episodically polluted by nanoplastics via air. We measure around 20 nanograms per cubic meter of air on average. And this is pristine and clean air, and you think it is nothing here, but it's actually almost always something.
Today, forests are also at risk of becoming exclusion zones, as they've already turned into massive reservoirs of micro and nanoplastics. I understand that our instinct, especially as parents, is to search for cleaner and safer places like coastlines and forests where the air feels fresher. But the paradox is that these very places have already become some of the most dangerous environments for human life. Let me give you an example. In a large city, an adult may inhale up to 106,000 microplastic particles during a 2-hour walk. Yet, in areas near the bodies of water, that number far exceeds that, and those 2 hours may be enough to trigger a cascade of diseases, whereas for some individual, a fatal outcome. It is important to understand that when a single micro or nanoplastic particles enters a cell, it destroys more than just that one cell. After the cell dies, the plastic particle is not eliminated from the body. It continues to move throughout the body, damaging other cells and triggering a chain reaction of destruction. This process is endless because plastics, as we know, can recharge and retain electric charge. The more microplastics enter a body, the faster this destruction spreads cell after cell, organ after organ. And time becomes critical here because our body has limited resources to fight this damage, while nanoplastics, they're not expelled. Instead, they continue to accumulate in ever-increasing quantities, destroying us from within. Nanoplastics are perfect killers not only of humans, but of the entire biosphere, and it's impossible to hide from them anywhere. They're literally pushing us out of the world we once knew. Micro-nanoplastics are already affecting our planet as well as the climate. And moreover, they're intensifying already devastating natural disasters and contributing to the worsening geodynamic crisis.
Climate and plastic in a single cycle of destruction. The world ocean is the largest system of our planet. It regulates climate and serves as the main source of oxygen. The ocean and the atmosphere form a single, interconnected climate system. Water has a remarkable ability to absorb and store immense amounts of heat, increasing its temperature only gradually. The accumulated heat is then evenly redistributed across the planet and transferred to the atmosphere. This property of the ocean, to efficiently dissipate heat from the Earth's interior, protects the planet from extreme temperature swings and helps stabilize the climate. But massive contamination of the oceans with micro and nanoplastics is disrupting this finely tuned mechanism. Electrostatically charged plastic particles bind water molecules, forming hydrate shells around themselves. This alters the physical and chemical properties of ocean waters. This has already reduced its thermal conductivity and created pockets of overheated zones where heat can no longer dissipate. Consequently, overall ocean warming is accelerating. This topic is explored in greater detail in the documentary Anthropogenic Factor in the Ocean's Demise. Excessive ocean heating, in turn, increases evaporation and disrupts atmospheric circulation. As a result, both the temperature and humidity of the atmosphere rise. Electrostatically charged nanoplastic particles act as condensation nuclei, causing moisture droplets to freeze at lower altitudes and at higher temperatures, 4 to 10 degrees Celsius. This accelerates cloud formation and contributes to abnormal weather events, large hail, extreme downpours, and disruptions of the hydrological cycle. Charged plastic particles are already influencing weather formation, affecting flight safety, cloud development, and even where and how the precipitation occurs. In other words, microplastic has already become a driver of climate instability.
We know what particles doing in the air, they produce clouds. If we have a particle in the air, the water vapor sits on these particles and forming clouds. So therefore, we want to understand how much nanoparticles influence the formation of clouds. And therefore, of course, in the alpine region, it can trigger the cloud formation and so also thunderstorm or extreme weather events.
When you have a big storm event, many micro and nanoplastics get released from the environment when they have been trapped in the soil, in the riverbeds, on their surfaces and things like that, and get mobilized in the air. So you then after storm, you have even more pollution.
This process sustains itself, creating a feedback loop. ocean warming increases water evaporation. Even more nanoplastic rises into the air with the vapor, and even more energy accumulates in the atmosphere, further heating the ocean. According to data, every degree of warming increases air humidity by 7% and lightning frequency by at least 12%. Thus, more heat, more moisture, more plastic in the air, more lightning, and the cycle continues endlessly. Observed trends indicate that this energy buildup is accelerating exponentially. And with each passing year, climate anomalies are becoming more distinct and more destructive.
We are seeing the hottest summer in Europe after having a record-breaking summer last year. Similarly, here in the northeast of US, we are seeing record-breaking temperature. Every year for last 2-3 years, we are saying, oh, this is the hottest day. And then the next year comes and there is a new hottest day. The nighttime temperature in Southeast Asia is not dipping at all in many places and kind of trapping the heat. So our body is not getting even that relief at nighttime. There is increase in air pollution. There is increase in all sorts of chemical pollution. And so if we think about this holistically, it's a huge impact on the planetary health. And I think this is a time, this is a reminder that we are part of the planetary system. We belong to it. We are not separate from it. And until we think holistically, I think, we'll define one issue, we'll define one threshold, we'll continue to go after that, maybe even solve it scientifically. But until we think holistically and act holistically as a community, as a society, I think we are in trouble.
We have reached a critical point where it's no longer possible to solve the climate crisis without simultaneously addressing the plastic pollution, and vice versa. The two are interconnected, each reinforcing the other. And as we continue to study this issue, the picture becomes even more alarming because we're now beginning to understand what is truly happening.
I am. Both for myself and my family, but also for the future generations. There was a time where I thought that, the climate change is real, of course, but this is for future generations to be affected by, and I was still equally concerned. But in no time, and I would say in less than 5 to 10 years, we started from that mindset and time frame. Within 5 to 10 years, we started feeling it, getting impacted by it in our day-to-day life. And so it's more concerning than ever before. And the timeline, which was predicted previously, has shortened exponentially. The impact we are seeing on a global climate, from ambient air to the thinning of the Arctic ice. And it's not linear model, right? I mean, the physics is going to play out. The thinner the ice, it's going to take much less amount of time to melt it, even the same volume, in a much shorter period of time. So I think these timelines are really concerning, and I am afraid, yes.
Indeed, many signs indicate that our planet's energy balance has been disrupted, and natural processes are intensifying exponentially. Consequently, we may have less and less time to respond, and nanoplastics are playing a key role in this acceleration. In the past, excess heat from the Earth's interior was removed gradually, step by step, yet effectively. It was first partially absorbed by the oceans, and then transferred into the atmosphere, and then finally released into the space. This sequential process prevented excess energy from accumulating within the Earth's interior or the atmosphere, allowing the planet to cool and reduce the thermal load on the inner layers. But today, this natural mechanism has been disrupted. Nanoplastics no longer merely affect the climate, but they also exacerbate the geodynamic crisis and intensify natural disasters by obstructing the release of heat from our planet's interior. The role of micro nanoplastics in this process is described in detail in the report on the progression of climate catastrophes on Earth and their catastrophic consequences. So our entire planet is contaminated with micro and nanoplastics, and we have nowhere to escape to. These particles are in us, in our children, disrupting and destroying more and more cells in our bodies. This is why confronting plastic pollution is no longer optional. It is essential for our survival. The first and most obvious step may appear to be eliminating the use of plastic and recycling the waste that has already accumulated. But we must ask ourselves, will that truly be enough?
The illusion of addressing plastic pollution.
Even if we were to stop plastic production today, even if the last plastic bottle we discard today, it's going to last there in our oceans for at least 400 plus years. And then the journey of micro nanoplastic begins. And so we have a poster in our cafeteria where we say that, you may not see your grandkids or great-great-great-grandkids, but I will, saying the plastic bottle. And I think that's true.
If we look at the scale of plastic pollution in the oceans, it becomes clear that a complete cleanup can take millennia. Today, the world ocean contains about 200 million tons of plastic waste. Meanwhile, every year, around 20,000 tons are extracted. That's less than 1/100th of 1%, a negligible fraction compared to the existing volume. At this rate, fully cleaning the ocean would take about 10,000 years. And that's only if we stopped all plastic entering the ocean starting today.
Plastics are entering the environment currently at a rate that far exceeds our capacity to remove it from the environment or to mediate the wastes.
Let's assume humanity achieves a technological breakthrough, invests enormous resources, and increases cleanup efficiency 5-fold. Even then, the process would still take around 2,000 years. In reality, we cannot cope even with the current annual influx of pollution, let alone eliminate the consequences of what has been accumulating for decades. Not only are we unable to remove all the plastic that has built up in the biosphere, but attempting to do so could also endanger living organisms.
There are some organization initiatives that are trying to collect the waste, accumulate that garbage patches, that locations. They're also collecting non-stone, the organisms living just the 15 centimeter of the first layer of top ocean. So those organisms, using that, those artificial material as a, hunting ground, nesting ground, feeding ground, or, they are laying egg on those plastics. So when you remove all these plastics, you also remove all those organisms. So because removal itself also another problem. So once plastics get in the environment, there is no proper and harmless way of removing these plastics from those environments.
Moreover, a significant portion of plastics has already broken down into micro and nanoparticles that now lie on the seabed, drift through the water column, have entered the bodies of marine organisms, and become part of the global cycle of matter. These particles cannot be captured with nets or collected manually. This means that simple mechanical removal of plastics from the environment, even under the most optimistic scenario, will not solve the problem. We are no longer dealing with debris that can simply be picked up, but with nanoparticles carrying an electrostatic charge. This nanomaterial has already become embedded in every living thing on the planet. And even if we succeeded in removing every plastic bottle and every wrapper from the ocean, one question would still remain. What happens next? We still do not have a safe method for disposing of the mountains of plastic waste we would collect.
There's mismanaged waste on land all around the planet in informal dump sites. Some waste has been incinerated, some of it commercially in incinerators that may or may not have appropriate screens and filters to collect associated chemicals that might be released. But of course, a lot is burnt in open burning scenarios in countries that are not wealthy enough to own the appropriate waste management facilities to deal with the plastic waste that is exported to them by other nations. And then some of it, of course, will have gone into so-called recognized waste management systems, but which might include burying it beneath the ground in landfill, where, of course, it could return to present problems in the future, or indeed incinerating it in commercial incinerators. But depending on the quality of incinerator, of course, there's concerns about the emissions from those incinerators.
Burning plastics, whether in backyard fires or industrial incinerators, does not solve the problem. It merely transforms them into a more dangerous form. When heated or burned, large plastic items break down into micro and nanoplastics that disperse into the air, settle onto surfaces, and enter water and soil with precipitation. The apparent disappearance of plastic in flames is an illusion. Burning simply accelerates the fragmentation of plastic into the tiniest particles many times over, into the very micro and nanoplastics that pose the greatest danger to human health. And it is precisely these electrostatically charged particles that can penetrate deep into the body, including the brain and other cells, where they trigger a wide range of diseases.
When you put plastic in a recycling facility, at first they will shred big plastic to generate flakes and small pieces of plastics, and then during that shredding, they also use for washing. They have to wash to remove some unwanted material on plastics. During that washing, material lose many. I mean, the huge percentage of the total mass. So those lost material will go to the wastewater stream. Recycling activities, practices, feeding microplastic pollution in the waterways. A simple and regular recycling facility can generate billions microplastics and then release into the either wastewater stream or waterway.
And unfortunately, what I see with some of the things that are claimed to be a solution is that they're not necessarily properly tried or tested before they're put into the market, and there may then be potential for unintended consequences.
Pyrolysis. At first glance, it looks like a technological miracle. We take plastic waste, heat it to 800 degrees Celsius without oxygen, and obtain fuel. Instead of piles of garbage, we get gas, liquid, and a small carbon residue. Sounds promising, doesn't it? But this technology has a flip side, an invisible and far more dangerous one. During high-temperature decomposition, plastic does not simply disappear. Pyrolysis is accompanied by emissions of dioxins and furans, some of the most toxic substances on the planet. They are carcinogenic, disrupt the endocrine system, and can accumulate in human tissues. They are hazardous even at low concentrations. Even if you manage to obtain 600 liters of liquid fuel from 1 ton of plastics, the price of such fuel is a threat to human health and life.
By relying on such disposal methods, we're only accelerating the transformation of plastics into an invisible, yet far more dangerous form. Let me remind you that the amount of micro and nanoplastics present in the ocean alone is already more than enough to destroy our entire biospheres, including the humankind 3 times over. Meanwhile, microplastics continue to disintegrate, generating vast amounts of nanoplastics. Recall Dr. Kenner's example. A single microplastic particle can fragment into billions of nanoparticles. And with countless microplastics already present everywhere, constantly breaking down into even smaller fragments, this process is driving the destruction of humanity and of everything around us. Today, many people have started turning this crisis into a business, inventing all sorts of methods that supposedly remove microplastic from the body. And people are willing to pay large sums for these treatments. But the real question is, do they actually work?
False hope. Today, in healthcare and even in some scientific circles, there's growing discussion about alleged methods to cleanse the human body of microplastics. A variety of approaches are being promoted, including plasmapheresis, hemosorption, mechanical filtration devices, dietary adsorbents, and so-called natural supplements claiming to detoxify the body. At first glance, it all sounds reasonable. If there's something toxic in the body, it should be removed. But the truth is that these methods don't actually solve the problem.
I don't think any scientifically proven techniques exist to filter out the micro nanoplastic from the blood. It gets deposited in the organs themselves, which is not really something you can filter out by sending the blood to some filtration machine.
Nanoplastics have already penetrated inside human cells. They are not just circulating in the bloodstream like an unwelcome guest you can simply escort out. They have become part of the body's internal environment. Yes, we can cleanse the blood with sorbents or filter plasma. But how effective can such procedures truly be?
We started this plastic production and the usage of these materials, which have a lot of, positive effects. That we in the hospital, I just, when I look around in my, daily work environment, I guess that 80% of everything I touch in the hospital is of plastic, starting with my gloves.
And probably 80-90% of the machine itself is made of the plastic. And that's a very important point for healthcare.
What's more, the very solutions used for blood purification procedures also contain plastics.
When you get sick, you are going to a hospital, you probably will go to the hospital for treatment, and then they will give you some solutions, some infusions, like they will put something inside your vein, and then they transfer some liquid from plastic package to your blood system. So those intravenous solutions has at least 62 microplastic particles per liter. So this is direct transfer, exposure, microplastic to human system, blood system.
So we end up with a paradox. We are using plastics to try to eliminate the consequences of plastics. Such procedures may indeed reduce the overall toxic load, but they don't address the core issue. They don't extract plastic from cells, don't neutralize its electrostatic charge, don't restore disrupted signaling pathways, and don't protect the brain, immune system, or mitochondria. An individual has every right to try such methods. It is their personal choice, but it's important not to harbor illusions. Those procedures will not restore lost health. Moreover, plastic isn't just a material used for packaging and household goods. It is the backbone of modern industry, healthcare, transportation, electronics, construction, and even space technology.
It's the second most common material on Earth after concrete, so it's extremely widespread.
I think going forward, it's going to be really important that we retain the important uses of plastic, because plastics are not here the enemy. It's not a treaty about not producing plastics. It's a treaty about ending plastic pollution, not ending the production of plastics. And plastics have the potential to bring clear societal benefit.
That is why the main goal today isn't to stop plastic production, but to find ways to reduce the impact of micro and nanoplastics on human health and the environment.
Creating false hope is extremely dangerous. It arises from a misunderstanding of reality and from basic ignorance. We must remember that the most dangerous plastic particles are those small enough to penetrate our cells. And once micro and nanoplastics enter our cells, they cannot be filtered out or removed. They become part of the body and slowly destroy us from within. The most serious problem is that we have no control over how much of this material enters us. Nanoplastics can even penetrate the skin, for example, when we swim in the sea or lie in the sun. And what can we do about nanoplastics that, once inhaled, travel directly to the brain and begin destroying neurons? Nanoplastics are among the most dangerous substances for the biosphere and for all life, including humanity. Yet, abandoning plastics altogether will be senseless because doing so would cause enormous global losses. Synthetic polymers, including plastics, form the backbone of countless modern industries, from medicine and nanotechnology to flexible electronics, neuromorphic hardware for AI, aerospace structures, automotive manufacturing, and construction. Their versatility, ease of shaping and processing, compatibility with other nanomaterials, and scalability have made them the foundation of our modern progress. The solution, therefore, is not to eliminate plastics, but to ensure that they no longer threaten life. And the real path forward begins with understanding precisely what makes nanoplastics so dangerous. Now, we already know that electrostatic charge is the basis for their destructive power. It is this charge that allows plastic particles to cling to membranes, cross biological barriers, including the brain, bind to proteins, and interfere with genetic processes. The charge transforms plastic from something inert into a tiny, yet powerful destructive force within the biosphere and humankind. Understanding this, the scientific group of ALLATRA was the first to propose a strategic direction, that is, to deprive nanoplastics of their ability to accumulate and retain electric charge. Note that countless nanoparticles exist around us, yet most do not penetrate or destroy our cells. Only plastics do because of their electret-like behavior. Thus, if we can eliminate this property, then we can turn micro-nanoplastics into inert and harmless particles that no longer pose danger to us or to the biosphere. Now, how did the scientific group of ALLATRA come to understand this and become the first to propose a solution? The answer goes back many years and to the work of Dr. Igor Danilov, a vertebrologist and researcher who spent many years studying spinal diseases. Over 20 years ago, he was actively engaged in scientific research focused on investigating degenerative processes in intervertebral discs. His work included a comprehensive experimental and clinical study to understand morphological and biochemical changes occurring in the nucleus pulposus, intercellular substance, and cartilaginous tissue of intervertebral discs. While studying cellular processes, Dr. Danilov focused on immune regulation and pathological reactions that could trigger cell degeneration. He noted that mitochondrial dysfunction was one of the main drivers of these changes, and this insight became the starting point for investigating what might be disrupting cellular function. Dr. Danilov frequently visited specialized laboratories, and in the course of detailed analyses, he found foreign particles inside the cells, which he later identified as plastic. This discovery became a key moment in his research, as he began to analyze possible mechanisms by which plastics affect cells. Through his investigations, Igor Danilov determined that the negative impact of tiny plastic particles on cells stems precisely due to the damage they cause to mitochondria. This conclusion was based on observations that cells containing these tiny plastic particles showed clear signs of mitochondrial dysfunction, which in turn exacerbated degenerative processes. Here, Igor Danilov suggested that the ability of plastic particles to penetrate cells may be due to their electret-like behavior. That is, the ability to accumulate and retain electrostatic charge, which allows them to form a biological shell around themselves. This property enables the plastic particles to enter cells easily, avoid detection by the immune system, cross protective biological barriers, including the blood-brain barrier, disrupt normal cell function, and provoke degeneration and cell death. On this basis, Igor Danilov proposed that to neutralize these tiny plastic particles, we must deprive them of their ability to accumulate and retain charge. He shared his findings and projections about the harmful effects of tiny plastic particles with his colleagues from various medical fields, including surgeons, oncologists, cytologists, pathologists, and geneticists, as well as with biologists and chemists. Soon after, these specialists confirmed his alarming observation that these plastic particles do accumulate in critical organs in the body, such as the brain, heart, intestines, endocrine and reproductive organs, where their presence can disrupt organ function and destroy our health. Igor Danilo's predictions were deeply concerning, especially in light of global trends, the rising production of plastics and the growing accumulation of plastic waste in oceans and ecosystems. Thus, more than 20 years ago, the scientific group of ALLATRA realized that micro and nanoplastics pose a serious threat not only to humans, but the entire biosphere. And each year, the number of these particles continues to grow, worsening the situation amid accelerating climate and geodynamic changes on the planet. The implications are far-reaching. If we can eliminate the charge from micro nanoplastics, we will not only eliminate their destructive impact on human health, but also remove the excess energy accumulating in the biosphere, the energy that currently fuels the geodynamic crisis and intensifies natural disasters. Thus, plastic would no longer act as a destabilizing factor, and many planetary threats could be mitigated at once if we can find a way to deprive nanoplastic of their ability to accumulate and retain charge. The question is, how can we achieve this? Well, let's be honest. This task is extremely difficult. It will not be enough to simply figure out how to neutralize the electrolyte behavior of these tiny plastics in a test tube. We must learn how to achieve this for every micro and nanoplastic particles already present in the biosphere, including those inside the human body, and do so without harming people or nature. Given the unprecedented scale of this challenge, solving it will require collaboration among experts across many disciplines: biophysics, nanotechnology, molecular toxicology, material science, and medicine. Plastic pollution is not a narrow environmental issue. It's a systemic global challenge that affects health, safety, natural resources, the stability of our civilization, and life itself. 20 years ago, the scientific group of ALLATRA already recognized the danger of micro and nanoplastics and identified the underlying principle of how they could be neutralized. But to this day, we haven't found a way to achieve it. That is why ALLATRA calls for unification of the world's scientific potential, a message that is unfortunately often misunderstood. Uniting scientists doesn't mean locking them all in one giant laboratory until they find a solution. Rather, it means fostering open international collaboration where experts from different fields freely share knowledge and work together toward a common goal. It's about aligning research methods, promoting open data exchange, developing compatible monitoring tools, and making coordinated policy decisions. The scientific community has already proven that such collaboration is possible when humanity unites around a common goal. Consider the Human Genome Project. Hundreds of institutions across dozens of countries, operating under unified data standards, achieved a breakthrough that transformed the course of science and medicine. In the same way, addressing the plastic crisis will require global cooperation, a collective effort to protect both ourselves and our planet. The ALLATRA International Public Movement actively supports the initiative of Pope Francis, Laudato Si, which seeks to raise the awareness of the importance of protecting our common home, the planet Earth. It is very important to emphasize that Laudato Si is far more than just a call to care for nature. It is a practical and scientifically grounded guide, a roadmap for transforming our world and creating a better world for future generations. The encyclical provides a clear direction toward a sustainable future, uniting ecology, climate justice, and humanity's shared responsibility for protecting our common home. The ALLATRA movement, fully embracing these principles, views Laudato Si as a powerful catalyst for global cooperation in addressing environmental and social challenges, and preserving the delicate balance of our planet. Cardinal Peter Turkson, the Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, is widely recognized for his dedicated work in ecology and social justice. Thanks to his educational efforts and tireless advocacy, the encyclical is widely disseminated worldwide as a practical guide for safeguarding our planet. It is a great honor for us to introduce Cardinal Peter Turkson, who will speak about the efforts being made to promote the encyclical Laudato Si and to put its principles into practice.
So, question is, how can we get Laudato Si to be widely read? Of course, it's a book that is there. I have presented it at the United Nations. I presented it at UNESCO in Paris. I presented it at Davos World Economic Forum. So I've talked about Laudato Si in several environments. I've also had a chance to present it even in university groups. Ohio State was the first group that wanted to hear about Laudato Si. And since then, I've been in Dayton, I've been in San Diego. And therefore, to get Laudato Si well known, we decided to create what we call Laudato Si Action Platform, which identified, in fact, 7 actors of Laudato Si. So churches means churches, mosques, synagogue, all places of worship, places of studies, basic university type of studies, educational centers, offices and factories. So we identified these 7 groups and say, okay, follow a team for 7 years and see what you get. Okay, all of that was to popularize the content of the encyclical Laudato Si and to encourage and enable people to put it into action or practice. So it's not just something written, but something that's actionable. And 10 years now, okay, this is 2025. Laudato Si was published in 2015. It's difficult to identify or talk about places we still have not heard of it. Personally, and from the point of view of our force, we've had occasion to kind of talk about this to different audiences and constituencies, but I still would not say that because of that it's known worldwide and by everybody and for everybody. We've tried our best and we'll continue to talk about it. And Pope Francis, to give this a big push, decided to create what they call Borgo Laudato Si. Over here in Rome, another initiative to get it known has been the development of what they call Laudato Si Diploma. There are various initiatives trying to do this. And the moment we get this established in universities, it attracts a lot of young people. And so, it becomes an occasion to spread knowledge of Laudato Si words.
For its scientific and social contribution to the protection of our planet, ALLATRA received the blessing of His Holiness, Pope Francis. This spiritual encouragement to continue working toward the preservation of our planet greatly inspired the participants of ALLATRA and motivated them to pursue a deeper research into the problem of nanoplastics, a growing threat to all humanity and its future. This effort resulted in the publication of the scientific report, Nanoplastic in the Biosphere, from Molecular Impact to Planetary Crisis. And this was presented for the first time in May 2025 at the International Conference of the Centesimus Annus Pro Pontifex Foundation in the Vatican by the President of ALLATRA, Marina Ovtsinova. This documentary is based in part on that scientific report. Such fundamental study into the threat of nanoplastics became possible through the international cooperation between the scientific group of ALLATRA and the Bolivian Catholic University, San Pablo.
We are a research team from the Bolivian Catholic University, San Pablo in Cochabamba. Our work seeks to understand how micro and nanoplastics circulate through our environmental matrices, how they interact with other pollutants, and what implications this has for human health and the biosphere. As part of the academic cooperation between the Bolivian Catholic University, San Pablo, and ALLATRA, we jointly prepared the report, Nanoplastics in the Biosphere, From Molecular Impact to Planetary Crisis. For the first time, a single document brings together comprehensive data on how micro and nanoplastics spread through the biosphere, enter food chains, and harm human health and ecosystems. The report is the result of an extensive interdisciplinary analysis that encompasses ecological, climatic, medical, physical, and chemical aspects of the harmful impact that micro and nanoplastics exert on the biosphere and human health.
The global threats facing humanity require united international action. And today, we have a clear direction. Thanks to the scientific group of ALLATRA, we not only recognize a problem, but understand its underlying physical nature, the electric charge that gives nanoplastics their destructive power. By addressing this cause, that is, by removing that charge and disarming the killer, we can give the biosphere and ourselves a chance to prevail. So we must use the time we still have. And this is not an exaggeration. Our cognitive abilities are rapidly declining, and this is serious. It is a result of nanoplastics accumulating in our brains. You may already notice it in yourself and those close to you. Unless we act, it will only worsen year after year. And now, you will learn why.
The age of intellectual extinction. Throughout the 20th century, scientists observed a trend. Since 1932, IQ scores had been steadily rising. This phenomenon became known as the Flynn effect. However, among generations born after the 1970s, the rise in IQ has reversed to a gradual decline. Mandatory IQ tests for military personnel in various countries show a decline in scores since the mid-1990s. According to another study conducted between 2006 and 2018 at Northwestern University, Americans showed a decline in IQ across 3 out of 4 cognitive areas. This decline in average IQ has been termed the reverse Flynn effect. In 2025, the scores of U.S. high school students on major math and reading tests dropped to the lowest levels ever recorded. Their average math score was the worst since the current version of the test was introduced in 2005, while reading scores were the lowest since testing began in 1992. Similar trends have been observed in other countries. The steady decline in IQ continues to this day. Intelligence scores are no longer rising. They're slowly, but surely falling. But what lies behind this troubling trend? One important correlation stands out. The decline in average IQ coincides with the exponential rise in plastic production and pollution. Take a look at the graphs. The more plastic, and therefore the more micro and nanoplastics in the environment, the lower the IQ. This shows a clear link between increasing the amount of plastics and declining cognitive abilities. And that is deeply alarming. This isn't just a statistical correlation. As plastic production has skyrocketed, our daily exposure to micro and nanoplastics has risen with it. Charged plastic particles can easily pass through biological barriers, including the blood-brain barrier. Once inside the brain, nanoplastic particles accumulate not only in neurons, but also in glial cells, the very cells that nourish and protect neurons and help form neural connections. There are many more glial cells in the brain than neurons themselves. Electrostatically charged nanoplastic disrupts the function of glial cells, triggering inflammation and chronic stress, setting off a continuous cycle of destruction inside the brain itself. For the brain, chronic stress and inflammation are like a computer running on a critically low battery. When the battery is nearly drained but dozens of programs are still running, the system automatically switches to power-saving mode, shutting down energy-intensive applications to avoid overheating or freezing. Our brain works in a similar way. When stress and inflammation reach a critical point, the brain, like a computer, will eventually shut down its most energy-demanding regions to survive and conserve energy. The first to go offline is the prefrontal cortex, the youngest and most complex part of the brain. It's considered the control center, responsible for such essential functions as intelligence, behavioral regulation, and the ability to think logically, consistently, and rationally by comparing facts and drawing conclusions. The most dangerous part is that the shutdown of the prefrontal cortex happens silently, without our awareness, and we won't even realize it. The brain will switch to its basic survival programs. The ancient rapid response system, the limbic system, takes over. Its key structures, the amygdala and hypothalamus, trigger the fight, flight, or freeze reaction, fast, impulsive, and without time for reflection. These systems will still stay active for a while because the brain identifies them as critical for survival. As a result, rational decision-making gives way to panic. Creativity and intelligence are replaced by degradation and dullness. Empathy fades, replaced by indifference or aggression. Electrostatically charged plastic particles that enter the brain interact with neuronal membranes, activating microglia, and continuously fueling oxidative stress and chronic inflammation. Prolonged stress literally reshapes the brain. In the prefrontal cortex, the center of analysis and control, neural connections weaken and disintegrate. Similar changes occur in the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory and learning. Neural connections fade away, and the hippocampus deteriorates. In the amygdala, the centers of fear and anxiety, the opposite happens. Connections strengthen, anxiety and aggression intensify, and panic attacks may develop. The brain reorganizes itself. Instead of thinking and analyzing, it starts operating on instincts. In doing so, it loses the ability to recognize real danger and respond appropriately. This isn't a temporary reaction. It's a fundamental restructuring of the brain. The capacity for learning, cooperation, and rational decision-making declines. This may help explain global trends we see today in society. A decline in average intelligence, a rise in anxiety and depression, an increase in aggression, impulsivity, and issues in social relationships. As the amount of plastic in the environment continues to grow, the reverse Flynn effect will only become more pronounced. People won't just become less intelligent, they won't even realize it. They'll become captives of a reality distorted by their own brains. As a result, humanity will lose the ability to perceive the world, events, and even obvious threats adequately. They'll no longer be able to connect facts logically, and therefore will lose the ability to make sound decisions. That will mark the end of human thinking.
Our cognitive decline is already underway. This is not a prediction, but reality. Plastics are making us less intelligent and less capable of responding to crises. They're damaging the regions of the brain that are responsible for memory, attention, problem-solving, and creativity. The very abilities we urgently need to achieve scientific breakthroughs and to find a way to neutralize the threat posed by micro and nanoplastics. And we have very little time left to make the right decisions. Yet, the loss of intelligence is not the worst that awaits us. Prolonged exposure to micro nanoplastics and their accumulation in the brain that leads to gradual failure of even our most basic survival functions. In other words, we risk losing not only our ability to think, but our very ability to live. And if that sounds like an exaggeration, consider the bees. Because their body mass is much smaller, the concentration of plastics in their brains is much higher. They already live in the world that we are now rapidly entering.
Microplastic can enter a bee's body through its thin cuticle, or along with food, and within just 72 hours, it reaches the brain. From there, as in humans, it triggers synaptic damage, neuroinflammation, cell death, and neurotransmitter disruption. The bee loses body mass, its metabolism slows, and its immunity weakens. Its sense of smell, memory, and navigation begin to deteriorate, and bees stop recognizing their own colony and can no longer find their way back to the hive. With prolonged exposure to nanoplastic, the damage becomes fatal. The bee's nervous system collapses under the strain, and some simply drop dead in mid-flight.
Look at this photo. You can see the brain of a bee that has been penetrated by nanoplastics. This amount of nanoplastics was enough to cause serious cognitive impairment in the bee. What is a critical point beyond which, like the bee, we stop recognizing the world around us and die on our way home? If nothing changes, this is a future that awaits us.
It's also important to acknowledge that there is no safe level of these chemicals in the body. So while the manifestation may take time at a lower doses, it is not immune, that at lower dose it's safe to have that. And why is it important? I think it's important for so many reasons, because as soon as we define the threshold, various special interest groups would argue to keep micro nanoplastic concentration below that level, whether it's in soil or in water or whatever that is. And what does that mean? Is that we are allowed to have some degree of micro nanoplastic in our sources, air, soil, water, and so forth. But it's a cumulative impact, we have to remember. It's not a particular threshold at any given point in time in the source of whatever we are consuming, but it's a cumulative impact in our brain. And we don't know that, honestly, because it's the factor of time there is going to be different for bee than for a young child who doesn't have a fully developed brain versus an adult brain.
Let us recall that a single nanoplastic particle in the human body is not equivalent to one dead cell. After destroying one, the same particle does not stop. It continues traveling through the body, killing one cell after another. So even the tiniest amounts of nanoplastics will damage the brain. And that's why there's no such thing as a safe concentration. And there will never be. The only difference lies in the rate of destruction. That is, the more nanoplastics there are, the faster the process. These plastic particles destroy the biosphere and the cells within our bodies. They damage organelles and biomolecules, including mitochondria and DNA, leading to reduced energy production, genetic mutation, the breakdown of neural connections, and the disruption of brain signals that regulate our organs and vital functions. All of this happens imperceptibly as we go about our daily lives. Yet, inside the brain, a silent systemic destruction is already underway. The question is, will we as humanity recognize the full scale of this threat in time and find a way to strip micro and nanoplastics of their ability to accumulate and retain electric charge?
A threat that must not be ignored.
The more I've learned about nanoplastics and how widespread they are and their harmful biologic effects, the more I am really, really concerned about just exactly what's going on, how much it's going to affect now us and future generations, and it's very sobering.
And I think it's very important that people need to understand that it's maybe not a big, plastic part which is out there somewhere, but it's the breakdown of those particles, even smaller of these products, in all the time smaller particles, which is then the big danger for us, and that is, I think, something which needs to go into the head of people, because then and in their minds, so they understand that this might be an avalanche which just comes down the road, but it will come. Or might come, if we don't do anything about it. So that's my point here. So we can't just leave it like that,
The most frightening aspect is that nanoplastics interfere with the most fundamental processes of life. Their electrostatic charge breaks bonds, distorts bioelectric signals, and destroys the harmony that exists between cells and entire organisms. It also disrupts the impulse of life, the signal that links a bee to a flower, a tree to the forest, a neuron to the brain. It silences rhythms that have resonated in unison for centuries. This is a threat that cannot wait. It must be confronted now. It is a matter of survival.
We can do as much, research and scientific community does whatever it does, but until this alarm goes to the public, nothing will change, right? It's not a science problem anymore. Science has clearly shown what it wanted to show. Maybe there will be 10 more studies in the next few years, right? And then what, right? Until we change, and this change is based on the public opinion. I want to leave something which is, our legacy should be habitable by our future generations. And that's the pure purpose we all have in common. If we can connect to our own health, I think that is way more powerful and more appealing for all of us to collectively act on this together. I think that's a very important point. And I think at a societal level, we all have to incorporate the other dimension beyond, in our balance sheets, beyond the dollars and pounds and euros and rupees, right, is the health, the impact on the health. And I think that has to be a part of the balance sheet, because what are we making money for if we can't survive or have a good quality of life? Then everything else is worthless for us and for the future generations.
I think maybe a reason why I do that, to just show by example that we need to do that. It's my big, hope that I can contribute to a solution, and also to people thinking about it, talking about it, and acting accordingly to make this world a better place, and not just always a worse place for the future, especially for the next generations and for my son and for families, and of course all over the world to take care.
And I'm trying to contribute the awareness of people, to explain, to show them the risks, and to make them understand the problem, the real extent of problem, to put them into action. So I just want to say one last word, that we only have one planet, and this planet is not single use, so we should consider this.
For too long, we have lived under the comforting illusion that there's still time, that humanity will always have a chance to recognize, understand, and respond. But that time has passed already. Our greatest challenge now is to find a solution before we cross the point of no return, while we still have both our intellect and the little time that remains. But for this to happen, all of humanity must first grasp the true scale of what is unfolding. Only then will we be able to direct our full scientific potential and resources toward finding a solution. As we have seen already, no single individual, organization, or nation alone can solve such a complex problem. The scientific community of ALLATRA has been searching for the solution for 2 decades, and although it hasn't been found yet, we know it exists. We understand that the answer lies at the intersection of physics, chemistry, and biology, which means that the solution is achievable, and finding it is essential for survival. Through years of research, we have come to clear understanding that the efforts of the entire global community must be united, and urgently. The challenge before us is enormous: to find a way to strip micro and nanoplastics of their ability to accumulate and retain electric charge across the entire biosphere, not just in a test tube or single organism. And to do so without harming humanity, the planet, or disrupting the Earth's magnetic field. Today, micro nanoplastics are present in every human being, including newborns taking their very first breath. In fact, unborn children developing in the womb are already exposed to these tiny particles, and even human eggs and semen are now contaminated and impacted by nanoplastics. For the first time in history, we face an enemy that threatens all life on the planet. And unless we change the course, this crisis will only deepen. Nanoplastics have indeed become the only true enemy of all humankind and each of us. I want to say that now is not the time for geopolitical rivalries or economic wars. It is not the time to build new empires. When one realizes that they're dying, it makes no sense to start building a new house, especially when no one will be left to live in it. And above all, we no longer have a time for military conflicts. There's no sense in killing one another when we're already being killed by a common invisible enemy, although some don't even realize it yet. We cannot remain indifferent to this threat because our future depends on whether we're capable of setting aside our divisions and uniting against this killer, nanoplastics, which threatens all life on our planet. The question is, are we capable of truly understanding all this? Or has nanoplastic already damaged our minds to the point where we don't even recognize the mortal danger hanging over humanity? If we can still see the reality for what it is, then we're obligated to act, to find a solution while we still can. We cannot shift this responsibility to the next generation, because if we fail to find a solution now, there will not be any true generation. And knowing this, giving up would mean betraying ourselves, our families, our children, and all of humanity, condemning all life on this planet to slow and inevitable death. Each of us, if still capable of understanding this threat, can contribute something meaningful to this effort. Only by acting together can we solve this monumental challenge and preserve the most precious thing that we have, life itself. Life is worth fighting for.